The cell was open, and the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy was not inside it, and Inspector Sethit Vane stood in the doorway it had left through and understood. In the cold and orderly way she understood most things, that everyone above her rank was about to lie. They would say a door failed. Doors did not fail on Coriol Reach, not on the Aught tier, not on the one cell the Warden Registry had spent 400 years learning how to keep shut. But they would say it, because the alternative was the thing that Sethit could already see with her own compound eyes and did not want to say either. The cell had not been broken, it had been left. She kept her 4 legs still on the threshold and let the forensic light run over the interior. 11 layers of containment. A pressure floor that read the weight of anything heavier than a hand. A gel wall rated to hold a collapsing sun for 6 of its own heartbeats. A scent lock, a sound lock, a lattice of tripwires so fine that a spore drifting across them would have brought the whole tier down in alarm. All of it intact. All of it dark and quiet and satisfied, like a set of jaws that had been told there was nothing to bite. And the floor of the cell, in the fine gray dust the Vaughan shed instead of hair, held a single line of prints walking out. Not clawing, not lunging, walking. Inspector. The station's overseer had come up behind her, and he was breathing the way the Keld breathed when they had already decided to be angry at whoever answered them. Drow Moon was a wide, tusked slab of a being, and the folds of his throat were flushed the deep bruise color that on his kind meant fear wearing the mask of authority. Tell me it's a sensor fault. Tell me the animal is in there and the array is lying to me. The animal is not in there, Sethit said, and the array is not lying. Those are 2 separate facts and you should hold them apart in your mind, Overseer, because you're going to want to fuse them into a comfortable one, and there isn't a comfortable one available. Moon's throat went a shade darker. It is a registry Aught specimen. Do you understand what that is? Do you understand what I am responsible for? I understand exactly what it is, Sethit said. I have read every page of its file. I helped write 4 of them. That is why I flew here, instead of sending a form. She stepped into the cell. She did it slowly because you did not walk fast into a room the quiet had walked out of, even empty, even with the beast half a station away or a system away or gone. The name was a crew name, not a registry name. The registry called it Aught, the first thing they had ever been unable to name honestly, but the crews called it the Quiet because that was the only thing it left behind. It did not roar. It did not announce. It killed the way a held breath ends, and the sensors that hunted sound had catalogued 81 of Sethit's colleagues over 4 centuries, and had never once caught the animal in the act, only the after. The silence where a heartbeat had been, the stillness where a warden had stood. The prints under her light were the size of her whole thorax. 6 of them, in the loping 4N2 gait the file described, and every one of them set down soft. She crouched and read the last print before the door, the one where the beast had stepped over the pressure floor's threshold and out into the corridor. The pressure floor should have screamed. It had not screamed. She checked the log on her wrist. The floor had registered the weight and had asterisk logged it as authorized. Overseer, she said, without looking up, who has authorization to open this cell from the inside? No one. There is no inside authorization. The concept is meaningless. Nothing is supposed to be alive in there but the specimen. And yet the floor logged an authorized egress at 1940 station time. It did not log a breach. It logged a asterisk departure. Someone's credential opened 11 layers of the hardest box the registry has ever built and walked the deadliest animal we have ever catalogued out of it like a groomsbeast on a lead. So I will ask again, and I would like a real answer. Whose credential? Moon's mouth worked. His handlers, ranged behind him in the corridor, had gone very still in the way that meant the answer was going to embarrass someone. The credential, said a thinner voice from the back, reads as a maintenance key. Tier 9, sanitation and stock. Sethit rose and turned. The speaker was one of the station's beast handlers, a lean gray Cedrine like herself, though younger, his carapace still soft at the seams. His name flash read *Osic, Handler Prime. He was holding a data slate, and he was holding it the way you hold something that has bitten you once already. Tier 9 sanitation, Sethit repeated. You are telling me the most secure cell in conquered space was opened with a * cleaner's key. I'm telling you what the log says. Osic's mandibles clicked, a nervous tick. The key that authorized the departure belongs to the Xenostock hold, the live animal larder, 22 decks down. It's where we keep the feed animals and the quarantine fauna before they're catalogued or culled. He hesitated. It's a menial post. The credential is held by the attendant on the night rotation. And who is the attendant on the night rotation? Osic looked at Moon. Moon looked at the floor. A handler at the back made a small sound that in the Keld tongue was almost a laugh, and in any tongue was the sound of a career deciding to end quietly. The human, Osic said. Sethit had met 3 humans in her life, and had found all 3 of them unremarkable, which the file told her was the point. She stood now in the overseer's operations ring, a high daylight chamber walled in curved glass, with the gas giant Coriol turning its banded orange face below, and the noon side of the Reach's arc lit up white and hard. And she read the personnel entry for the 4th human she would ever meet, while the room around her tried very hard not to become a stampede. TOVAR RU, Provisional Labor Contract Subclade Terran, Age 20 Solar Standard. Post Xenostock Attendant Night Rotation Deck 22. Prior none of note. Flags none. Notes brought 1 companion animal aboard under the small fauna allowance. Cleared. See Annex. She did not read the annex. She would come to regret that, though not in the way she expected. She took it, Moon was saying. He had found the version of the story he wanted, and he was gripping it now with both wide hands. The human took the specimen. Industrial theft. Or she is an agent, a Terran plant, an infiltration. They warned us the Deathworld subclades were not to be trusted with sensitive posts, and we put one on the * stock deck, which touches every larder line on the station. Overseer, Sethit did not raise her voice. She had found over a long career that lowering it worked better on a panicking room because it forced them to stop and listen to hear you, and stopping was most of what they needed. A 20-year-old sanitation contractor did not defeat 11 layers of registry containment. Nothing defeated your containment. That is what you are refusing to hear. The containment opened, willingly, from the inside, for that animal. And then that animal walked out, on foot, unhurried, and did not harm the array, did not harm the tier, did not harm 1 single crew member on a station of 9,000 souls, on its way to wherever it decided to go. The room quieted. That was the part none of them had let themselves hold. Not that the quiet was loose, but that it was loose and had hurt no one. Registry ought, Sethit said into that quiet, has a documented kill count of 206. Wardens, handlers, ecologists, 4 full retrieval teams. It has never, not once in 400 years of records, been in an unsecured space with a living being and left that being alive. And tonight it walked 22 decks through a crude station, past night shifts and mess lines and a nursery on deck 15, and the only thing it did was arrive somewhere. Do you understand why I am not talking about theft? Nobody answered. Because, she said, for the first time in the history of the file, the animal wanted to be somewhere and got there, and the getting there was gentle. And I have spent my life on the fact that this animal does not have a gentle. So before anyone on this station fires anything, I am going to go and look at the somewhere it chose. On foot. Slowly. And I am going to bring exactly 1 handler and no weapons, because a weapon is a promise you have to keep, and I am not ready to make that animal any promises yet. Moon's throat flushed to near black. You are not going down there unarmed to negotiate with a class-ought predator like it's a lost pet. No, Sethit agreed, and something in her voice made the handler Osik look up. "I'm going down there to find out why it thinks it isn't one anymore." 22 decks was a long way down when you took the maintenance spine instead of the lifts, and Sethet took the spine on purpose, because she wanted to see the route the animal had taken, and because the lifts had cameras and the spine had almost none, and she was beginning to suspect that the beast had known the difference. That should not have been possible. She catalogued the thought and set it aside and kept climbing down. Osik came with her. She had chosen him for 2 reasons. He was the one who had said the human without trying to turn it into a weapon, and he was the one whose file said he had survived a Vaughn encounter 9 years ago on a retrieval that had lost everyone else. She wanted, on the long climb down, to hear about that. Handlers who had survived the quiet were rare, and they did not talk to registry inspectors easily, but the spine was long and the dark made people honest. "You were on the Vess retrieval," she said, when they had gone 6 decks in silence. Osik's climbing rhythm hitched, then steadied. "You read that?" "I read all of it. 9 handlers went to the surface of the death world to take the last living specimen alive. 1 came back. The registry gave you a commendation and a reassignment as far from field work as it could arrange, which is how a survivor of the worst retrieval in Warden history ends up minding a live larder on a way station." She paused. "I'm not asking about the commendation. I'm asking what you saw." For a while there was only the sound of their claws on the rungs and the low tidal hum of the station's spine. "You want to know if I think it can plan," Osik said finally. "That's what you're circling. You want to know if it opened that cell on purpose or if it's an accident of physics we haven't understood yet." "I want to know what you saw." Osik stopped climbing. He hung there in the half-dark, and the little safety lights lit the soft new seams of his young carapace, and Sethet realized he was not as young as she'd thought. He had simply stopped aging the day he came back from Vess, the way some survivors did, frozen at the moment the world had proven larger than them. "We had it in a suppression net," he said. "Rated for a collapsing sun, same as the cell. 8 of us on the lines. It let us net it. That's the part no one writes down. It let asterisk us. It stood in the open on a plane under 2 suns, and it watched us come, and it was the biggest quiet I have ever felt in my life, Inspector, a quiet with a shape, and it let us throw the net, and it let us cinch the lines, and then it looked at us." His mandibles worked. "It doesn't have eyes, you know that. It reads pressure and scent. But it looked at us, and I understood, all 8 of us understood in the same second, that it had let us net it because it was curious what we thought the net was for, and then it was curious about something else, and then there were 7 of us, and then 6. It never hurried, Inspector. That's what I have never been able to make anyone believe. It was never in a hurry. It had all the time in the galaxy, because nothing that met it had ever had anywhere else to be." Sethet was quiet. "I came back," Osik said, "because it stopped. Not because I was fast or clever or brave, because it stopped. It had decided it had learned whatever the net had to teach it, and it walked away, and it left me alive the way you leave a page in a book you might read later. I have spent 9 years being a page." He started climbing again. "So when you ask me if it can plan, Inspector, planning is the smallest thing it does. It waits. It chooses. And tonight, for the first time in 400 years, it chose to go asterisk toward something instead of simply outlasting everything that came at it. And I would give a great deal to know what a live larder on Deck 22 has that a whole galaxy of wardens never did." "So would I," said Sethet. "Let's go find out." Deck 22 smelled of straw and warm animals and the faint green rot of feed pellets, and it was, against every expectation Sethet had carried down the spine, full of daylight. She had not known there was daylight this deep. The xenostock hold was pressed against the station's outer skin, and someone, the human, she would learn, had cranked every shutter on the long curved outer wall wide open, so that the raw white noonlight off Coriol's cloud tops came flooding in through the armored glass and lay across the pens and the feed bins and the drifting straw dust in long hard bars. It was the brightest room Sethit had stood in since she'd left the surface of her own homeworld. It was, she thought, an absurd place for the end of the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy to be waiting. The pens ran in 2 long rows down the hold. Feed animals, mostly dull, 6-legged grazers bred for protein, dozing in the light. A quarantine row behind mesh, holding whatever fauna the station's traffic had swept up that cycle. A workbench. A rack of cleaning tools. A cot folded against the wall where the night attendant clearly slept when the rotation ran long. A ceramic bowl on the floor by the cot, and a smaller one beside it, and a bag of something dry with Terran script on it that Sethit's translator rendered uselessly as *Senior Formula, Ocean Whitefish and Rice. And at the far end of the hold, in the widest bar of daylight, in the open, unnetted, uncaged, lay Registry Ought. Ossik made a sound Sethit had never heard a grown Cedrine make. She put out one leg and held him where he was. The beast was enormous. The file's dimensions were accurate, and the file's dimensions were also a lie, the way a number is always a lie about a living thing. Matte black, drinking the daylight instead of reflecting it, so that even in that flood of white it was a hole in the room shaped like a predator. 6 limbs folded under it. A long, low, eyeless head laid flat along the floor. The armored plates of its back rose and fell, slower than any threat had a right to be. It was not hunting. It was not coiled. It was lying in a bar of sun with its head on the floor, and it was, Sethit made herself use the word, because accuracy was the only tool she had ever trusted, it was resting. And it was not resting alone. There was a small animal on top of it. Sethit's translator had no entry for it. Later she would learn the word. For now she simply saw a creature perhaps a 9,000th of the beast's mass, orange, striped, round with the fat of a comfortable life, folded into a loaf shape directly on top of the great black skull of Registry Ought, its own small eyes shut, its own small sides rising and falling in a rhythm that did not match the beast's and did not care to. One of its paws hung down over the beast's brow. Its face was tucked into its chest. It was, unmistakably, asleep. It was asleep on the deadliest animal in the galaxy, the way one might sleep on a warm rock, with the total, sovereign indifference of a thing that had never in its life imagined it might be prey. And beside them both, cross-legged on the floor in the daylight, in a stained gray coverall with the sleeves shoved up, holding a data slate she was not looking at, sat a small human female, and she looked up at the 2 Cedrine in the doorway with the mild, unhurried expression of someone whose shift had been interrupted by a delivery she hadn't ordered. "You're going to want to keep your voices down," said Ru Tavar. "The big one just got him to sleep, and it took all afternoon." The night it came, Ru Tavar had been on her knees scraping the number 4 grazer pen and thinking about nothing in particular, and the first she knew of it was that Chester stopped washing his foot. That was the thing about the cat that most people never learned, because most people never watched a cat long enough to learn anything from it. Chester was a barometer. He had been a barometer for 11 years, since he was a kitten under the porch of a house Ru no longer let herself picture, and if you paid attention to Chester, you generally knew what a room was going to do about 30 seconds before it did it. He had stopped washing his foot. He had gone still on the workbench with his foot still up, a fat orange comma against the daylight shutters, and he had turned his head, slow and deliberate, toward the freight seam at the dark end of the hold, and he had not fluffed and he had not hissed and he had not run. He had simply looked, with interest, the way he looked at a new can. And Ru, who trusted that look more than she trusted the station's entire sensor grid, had set down her scraper and looked where Chester was looking, and out of the dark between the last 2 feed bins, the biggest animal she had ever seen in her life had come, without a sound, on 6 legs and stopped, and laid its long blind head down almost to the floor and waited. She should have been afraid. She was clear-eyed enough, even in the moment, to know that a normal person would have been afraid, and to file the fact that she was not among the small pile of facts about herself she had stopped examining a long time ago. She was not afraid because the thing in the doorway was not doing any of the things that frightened animals do. It was not big-making itself. It was not showing her anything. It had come in low and slow and stopped at the edge of her light with its head down, and she had cleaned enough scared, sick, cornered, and dangerous animals in her 20 years to read the single most important line of body language there is, the one that is the same on every world she'd ever heard of. "I am not here to start something." "Well," she'd said quietly, "because that is what you say. Hello." The beast had not moved. Chester had. Chester had climbed down off the workbench with the unhurried entitlement of an old Tom who has decided a situation is beneath his concern, crossed the open floor of the hold with his tail up, walked directly to the enormous silent thing that had killed 206 trained wardens, sat down a body length from its lowered head, and begun, pointedly, to wash the other foot. And the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy had done the single thing that no file, no warden, no retrieval team, no overseer, and no registry inspector had ever recorded it doing in 400 years. It had watched the cat wash its foot. And then, by fractions, the great head had come the rest of the way down to the floor, and the vast armored body had lowered itself into the straw, and the beast had let out a long, slow breath through vents Rue couldn't see, a breath that stirred the straw dust into the light, and there was no other word, and Rue was not a person who reached for large words. It had relaxed. She hadn't understood it that night. She had understood from cleaning cages only the shape of it. She'd understood it better by the next morning, and best of all much later, when she'd finally sat with it long enough to see the thing plainly. That this animal had spent its entire long life as the most frightening thing in every room it had ever entered, and had never once, not on its own murdering death world and not in 4 centuries of cells, met a living creature that did not, at some animal level, scream. Everything fled it. Everything that couldn't flee froze. Everything that couldn't freeze fought. It had never in its life been near a heartbeat that simply did not care. And then a fat old cat with a bad hip and a bald patch over one eye had walked up to it, sat down, and washed his foot, radiating the specific serene contempt of a creature who has decided you are furniture. And something in the beast that had been braced for 400 years had, at long last, been allowed to set itself down. That was the night it came. Rue had let it stay because she could not think of a single practical way to make it leave, and because Chester had clearly already decided the matter, and because it hadn't done anything but breathe. She had gone back to scraping the number 4 pen. The beast had watched her work. Sometime before dawn she had looked up and found Chester asleep against its foreleg, a small orange curl in the black, and the beast lying with its head turned so that the cat was between it and the dark, and she had thought, in the plain flat way she thought about most things, "Oh, and then, he's guarding it." Not the beast guarding the cat. The cat guarding the beast. She hadn't known, that first night, whose credential the doors had read to let it out of wherever it had been. She'd find out soon enough that it was hers, that the thing had come down the maintenance spine and the doors had opened for it, and the logs had blamed her key because her key was the last honest key on the route, and the station systems, faced with something they had no category for, had reached for the nearest small explanation, the way frightened things always do. She hadn't known any of that. She'd only known that her hold had a new animal in it, that the new animal was sad in the specific way that dangerous animals get sad, and that it was, for reasons she couldn't name and didn't try to, hers to look after now. She was good at looking after things. It was the one thing she had ever been unambiguously good at. It was why she was 22 decks down on the night rotation with the feed animals and the cull list, and no one to talk to but a cat. Because the things you are good at are not always the things a station pays well for. And a girl from a death world who was calm around large animals and did not flinch, and did not quit, was worth exactly one provisional labor contract, and a bunk 22 decks from the nearest window that opened. She had cranked the shutters that first morning because the beast lay in the dark end and she wanted to see it properly, and she'd found that when the noon light came flooding in, the beast had shifted, without seeming to decide to, into the widest bar of it, and laid its head down in the sun. So she left the shutters open after that. The feed animals liked it. Chester liked it. The beast, it turned out, liked it most of all, this creature bred and born on a world of 2 white suns, kept for 400 years in the gray dark of cells, because the dark was easier to bolt shut, lying now in a flood of borrowed daylight with a cat on its head, breathing slow. That was the somewhere it had chosen. Rue could have told them that if any of them had ever once asked her a question instead of an accusation. It hadn't chosen her exactly, and it hadn't chosen the cat exactly. It had chosen the sun and the straw and the 2 heartbeats in the room that didn't run. It had chosen the only place in the whole turning galaxy where nothing was afraid of it. And Rue, who had left a great deal behind to come this far, and had learned to make a home out of a larder and a cat and a strip of stolen daylight, understood that better than the Warden Registry ever would, because she had, in her own small way, done exactly the same thing. The big one just got him to sleep, and it took all afternoon, Rue said again, because the 2 tall gray aliens in the doorway had not moved and were doing the frozen thing that people did, and she had learned that the frozen thing usually broke faster if you gave them something ordinary to hold onto. Chester's 12. He doesn't sleep deep anymore. If you shout, he'll wake up, and then the big one gets anxious, and you do not want the big one anxious, so voices down. There's a stool by the bench if you want to sit. I've only got the one, though, so one of you's on the crate. The nearer alien, the older one, careful, with the still way of holding herself that Rue associated with vets and with the one good sergeant she'd known, took one slow step into the hold. Just one, testing the floor of the situation the way you test ice. You are Tavar, the alien said. Rue Tavar, night attendant. That's me. I am Inspector Sethet Vane of the Warden Registry. A pause, Wade. Do you know what that animal is? Rue looked at the beast breathed. Chester, on its skull, made the small chirping sound in his sleep that he'd made since he was a kitten, and one of the beast's back plates flexed, very slightly, the way a person's hand tightens when someone they love shifts against them. I know it's the saddest thing I've ever had in here, Rue said, and I've had a lot of sad things in here. This is where the cull animals wait, Inspector. I get everything that's too broken or too dangerous or too much trouble for anywhere else on the station. So I've seen sad, that one's the worst of it. She looked back at the aliens. You're going to tell me it's a killer, I already know. I read animals for a living, and I read that one the first night. It's killed a lot of things. It's killed people. I'm not stupid, and I'm not pretending it's a kitten. She tipped her head at Chester. That's a kitten. Well, was 12 years ago. The younger alien in the doorway made a low sound. He had not taken his eyes off the beast. He was, Rue saw, doing the thing that the ones who'd been hurt did, running the arithmetic of the door behind him, the distance to it, the beast's reach, over and over, a loop he couldn't shut off. She'd seen it in shelter animals. She'd seen it in herself once in a mirror, and had decided she didn't like the look of it and had put it down. You're the one it hurt, she said to him, not unkindly. His mandibles clicked. It killed my team, 8 of us. On its world I was, he stopped. You were the one it let go, Rue said, and watched the words land on him like a weight taken off. She knew that particular relief. It was the relief of finally being seen by someone who wasn't going to make it mean anything. Yeah, I figured. It does that. It's got a thing about, she searched for it, found it, said it plainly, about not finishing. It leaves things it's curious about. You were a page it might read later. She saw him flinch and gentled it. That's not a threat. That's the opposite of a threat from that animal. It's the closest thing it's got to keeping something. Inspector Sethet Vane had gone very still, and Rue understood, in the way she understood animals, that she had just said something the inspector had been circling for a long time and had not been able to land. Good. She liked the inspector already. In the wary provisional way she liked anything new. The inspector asked questions in her head before she asked them out loud, which put her ahead of roughly everyone else Rue had met on the reach. "Tavar," Sethit said carefully, "how long has it been here?" 6 nights. 6. That got even the inspector. It has been off the ought tier for *6 nights, and this station reported it missing 11 hours ago. "I don't file reports on my animals unless they're sick or dead," Rue said. "It wasn't sick and it wasn't dead. It was sleeping. I feed it out of the number 9 cull stock, which is going to waste anyway, and it keeps to its end of the hold, and it hasn't touched me or the cat or the feed animals or so much as scratched a shutter. I've had worse boarders." She shrugged, a small human motion the translator did not need to render. "I figured somebody'd come looking eventually. I didn't figure it'd be this many of you at once." "This many of us," Sethit said slowly, "is going to become a great deal more of us very quickly, Tavar, and I need you to understand the shape of what's coming, because I don't think anyone has told you the truth yet, and I've decided to be the one who does." She lowered herself carefully onto the crate, not the stool. She left the stool, Rue noticed. Some instinct of respect Rue filed away, and put herself down at Rue's level, and the beast tracked the motion with the eyeless attention of its whole long head, and did not rise. "That animal is the single most valuable and most feared specimen the Conquered has ever held. Above us, right now, there is an overseer explaining to a marshal that it is loose. Within a day there will be a retrieval order. Within 2 there will be a kill order, because a retrieval will be attempted, and the retrieval will fail because they always fail. And when a retrieval of a classot fails, the standing protocol is not to try again. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Rue looked at the beast in the sun, at the cat on its head, at the slow 400-year breath finally let all the way out. "You're telling me," she said, "that they're going to come down here and kill the first thing that ever let it sleep?" "Yes. Over my hold. Over your hold. Over you if you're standing in front of it. They will not see that as a reason to stop. They will see it as a Terran contractor obstructing a registry action, and there are protocols for that too." Rue was quiet for a while. Outside the armored glass, Coriol turned its great banded face, and the noon light shifted a hand's width across the floor, and the beast, without appearing to decide to, moved its bulk a slow fraction to keep its head in the sun, and Chester rode the motion without waking, a small orange boat on a black tide. "Inspector," Rue said finally, "can I show you something, before the rest of them come, so that at least one of you saw it with your own eyes and can't unsee it later?" Sethit Vane looked at the human for a long moment. Then she looked at the young handler still frozen in the doorway, and something passed between the two Cedrine, some understanding of rank and risk, and Sethit said, "Ossic, close the deck door. Log us as conducting a preliminary assessment. Do not call up. Give me 1 hour before this becomes what it's going to become." "Inspector." 1 hour, Handler Prime. You survived that animal once by standing still and paying attention. I'm asking you to do it again." Ossic looked at the beast breathed, the cat chirped in its sleep. He closed the door. "All right, Tavar," Sethit said, and there was something in the careful old inspector's voice that had not been there on the long climb down, something Rue recognized because it was the thing she felt every time an animal she'd written off surprised her into hope. "Show me." What Rue showed her was almost nothing, and that was the whole point, and Sethit Vane understood it only because she had spent 40 years learning to see the almost nothings that everyone else's fear edited out. Rue stood up. She did it the way she seemed to do everything, without ceremony, and she crossed the hold toward the beast, and Sethit's whole body locked with the reflex of 4 decades of training that said you do not approach a classot. You do not turn your back on a classot. You do not enter the reach envelope of a classot, and the human walked straight into that envelope with a data slate under her arm and stopped a single body length from the enormous blind head and said, in a normal voice, "Scoot." You're on the good bit. And the beast moved. Not away, over. It gathered its 6 limbs under it, and it rose, its mandibles locked. Even Ossic behind her stopped breathing, and it was upright, a black wall that blotted the daylight, 206 deaths standing in a straw-strewn larder, and Chester slid off its skull with a disgruntled feline noise and thumped to the floor and stalked off to sulk on the crate, and the beast stepped, delicately, over the small pool of sun it had been lying in, and lay back down a body length to the left, and put its head down again in a fresh patch of light. Then it waited. Rue crouched where it had been lying in the warm straw and reached into her coverall and took out a stiff-bristled brush, the kind Seth had seen in 1,000 groom kits, and she said, "Okay. Same as yesterday." And she began, with long, even, unhurried strokes, to brush the great armored flank of the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy. Seth counted the strokes. She could not have said why, except that counting was what she did when a thing was too large to hold whole, and so she counted, and the count steadied her the way it seemed to steady the beast. 1, 2, 3, the brush hissing over the matte black plates, shedding fine gray dust into the light. 4, 5, 6, and the beast's breathing lengthening under it. 7, 8, the great head sinking a fraction lower, and Rue talking the whole time in a low, flat murmur that carried no information at all. That was pure tone, the sound a person makes to an animal to say nothing is wrong, nothing is coming, you can put it down. Asterisk and Seth realized she was hearing the thing she had flown across 4 systems to find. The beast had not been broken out, it had not been stolen, it had not been controlled, it had been gentled. Nobody's ever done that, Ossic said. He had come a few steps into the hold without seeming to notice he'd done it, drawn against 9 years of nightmares by the impossible ordinariness of the thing in front of him. His voice cracked on it. "Inspector, nobody has ever touched it. Do you understand? The retrieval teams used remote lines and hardened frames. The keepers used gas and gates. In 400 years no living hand has been laid on that animal and lived, and that child is." "Brushing it," Seth said. "Brushing it." "Because it sheds," Rue said, without stopping and without turning around. "And if you don't brush a shedding animal, the loose stuff mats up under the plates and it gets itchy and sore. And a sore animal is a short-tempered animal, and nobody wants that one short-tempered. So, stroke, stroke. You brush it, every day. Same time, same strokes, same side first. Animals like knowing what's next, big ones especially. The routine's half of what settles them. It's not the brushing, it's that the brushing always comes, that the day has a shape it can count on." She moved to the beast's shoulder. The beast let out the long, slow, vented breath, and Seth felt it move the dust in the air across the whole width of the hold. This one never had a shape it could count on. 400 years of cells, and every cell different, and every keeper different, and every day the only sure thing was that everything was scared of it. That'll make anything mean, Inspector. Being frightening every second of your life with nowhere to set it down. Stroke. It's not mean. It's just tired. It's the tiredest animal I ever met. Seth Vane, first-rank inspector of the Warden Registry, author of 4 pages of the file on registry audit, looked at the count in her head, 31, 32, and looked at the great blind head laid down in the borrowed sun, and understood that she had spent her career studying an animal that no one had ever once tried the simplest thing on. They had studied its jaws and its silence and its kill count and its impossible strength. They had never studied its loneliness, because loneliness was not a registry category, and the registry only saw what it had a box for. "Tavar," she said, "when you brush it, does it?" She did not have the words for what she wanted to ask, which was rare for her. "Does it understand what you're doing, or is it merely tolerating a stimulus?" Rue thought about it. She was, Seth had begun to appreciate, a person who actually thought about a question before she answered it, which made her the second-best interlocutor Seth had encountered on this station, and the human had been aboard for 8 months. "I don't think it thinks like we do," Rue said. "It doesn't have words, but it knows the difference between a thing that's happening to asterisk it and a thing that's happening asterisk with asterisk it. Every animal knows that difference. It's the oldest one there is. And nothing had ever happened with asterisk that beast before. Everything happened to it. It got netted, gassed, moved, catalogued, poked. Things happened to it for 400 years. Stroke. The brush happens with it. It holds still because it's decided to, not because it can't get away. That's the whole thing, Inspector. That's the only thing I did. I never made it do anything. I just started doing something near it every day at the same time and left it up to the animal whether it wanted to be part of that or not. She finished the flank and stood and dusted her knees. It wanted to be part of it. Turns out the deadliest thing in the galaxy just wanted somebody to have a routine it was allowed into. For a moment no one said anything. The daylight moved. Chester on the crate had recovered his dignity and was washing the foot again. Then Ossic, the survivor, the page, said in a strange, thick voice, "It never let us be part of anything. We were only ever to asterisk it." And Sethet heard 400 years of the file rearrange itself behind that sentence, and she thought, "This is the thing I will not be able to make the overseer understand, and it is the only thing that is true." "How long," she asked Rue, "before you think it would follow you?" Rue blinked. "It already does. Little ways. If I go to the far bins it comes and lies down where it can see me. It's not on a lead and I couldn't make it do anything it didn't want to, but—" She stopped, and for the first time since Sethet had walked in, the human looked uncertain, and Sethet understood that she was looking at the exact thing the human was most afraid to hope for. "But it stays. Nights, it stays. I stopped locking the freight seam 3 nights ago to see if it'd leave, and it didn't, and I—" She stopped again. "I probably shouldn't be telling a registry inspector. I stopped locking a containment door." "No," Sethet agreed. "You probably shouldn't. Fortunately, I've stopped taking notes." She rose from the crate. The hour Ossic was holding for her was bleeding away, and she could feel the station above them beginning to move, a pressure in the deck plates that had nothing to do with the animal in front of her, and everything to do with the animals in the operations ring. "Tavar. I'm going to go back up now and spend whatever I have left of my authority buying you time, and I want to be honest that it will not be much, because the thing I have understood in this hold is not a thing the people above me have a box for, and people do not act on things they have no box for. They act on the box." She looked at the beast. The beast, impossibly, had turned its blind head to follow her voice, and there was in the angle of that head something that on any other animal Sethet would have called asterisk attention, paid to a friend of a friend. "So while I'm buying time, I need you to think about a question, and I need you to think about it honestly, because your answer is going to matter more than anything I say upstairs." "Okay." "If it came to it," Sethet said, "if they came down here with a kill order and cutting frames and a marshal who has never in his life been wrong out loud, would that animal choose to leave, to save itself, or would it choose to stay and put 400 years of what it is between them and you?" Rue looked at the beast for a long time. "That's the wrong question, Inspector," she said quietly. "You're asking what it'll do. I already know what it'll do. It'll stay. That's the whole reason it came here. It's done running." She crouched and picked up the brush and turned it over in her hands. "The right question is what I'll asterisk do, because if it stays and they come, then the only thing standing between a scared animal and a room full of people it could kill is me. And whether that ends with anybody walking out of here depends entirely on whether I can keep it calm while they do the stupidest thing I've ever seen a lot of smart people line up to do." She looked up. "So don't buy me time, Inspector. Time doesn't help. Buy me a way to get one person with a kill order to stand in this doorway for 60 seconds and watch that thing sleep before he gives the word. That's all I need. 60 seconds of somebody actually looking. Can you buy me that?" Sethet Vane considered the young human in the stained coverall, and the cat, and the beast, and the impossible thing they had made in a larder 22 decks down, out of sunlight and routine, and the refusal to be afraid. I don't know, she said, because it was true and the human deserved true. But I'm going to find out how much a first-rank inspector's word is actually worth. I've wondered for years. It was worth, it turned out, about 4 hours. By the time Sethit came up the spine into the operations ring, the ring had become a war room, and the war was against a sleeping animal and a girl with a brush, and the being running it was a marshal. Marshal Koru Vek was conquered enforcement, not registry, and the distinction mattered the way the distinction between a scholar and a blade matters. He was of a species Sethit's people called the Threll, tall, plated in overlapping bronze, with a face built around a hard forward beak, and 2 ranks of eyes that had never in their institutional life been asked to look at something twice. He had arrived on a fast cutter while Sethit was in the hold, which meant someone had called enforcement the moment the specimen was reported missing, which meant the kill order Sethit had predicted within 2 days was already, functionally, in the room. Vec did not so much stand in the operations ring as occupy it, the way a verdict occupies a courtroom. Inspector Vane, he said, without turning from the tactical display on which someone had rendered Deck 22 as a threat map, the beast a red mass, the hold a red room, the exits marked in the cold blue of a plan already written. You went down, alone, unarmed, into the reach of a classot. I've read your record and I did not have you marked as a fool, so I'll assume you had a reason, and I'll give you the length of this sentence to tell me it before I have you removed from my operational area. The animal is stable, Marshal, Sethit said. It is not in a fight posture. It has been off the tier for 6 days and has harmed no one. There is a... She chose the word deliberately, because she needed to seed it now, before the frame set, a asterisk containment opportunity down there that enforcement has never had and may never have again, and it will be destroyed the instant you send a hard team through that door. A containment opportunity. Vec's ranks of eyes shifted to her. Explain. It's calm because of the conditions in that hold, the light, the routine. The 2 other animals that don't threaten it. It is, for the first time on record, a classot in a low arousal state that a living being can approach. If we study asterisk y asterisk, we may finally learn to hold this species without losing teams to it. That is worth more to the conquered than a corpse, Marshal. A dead ought teaches us nothing we don't already know. A calm one could rewrite the whole discipline. It was not a lie. That was the thing Sethit was proudest of later, that everything she'd said to Vec was true, and that she had chosen the true things that pointed toward mercy, which is the only honest way anyone has ever bought time for a living thing from an institution. Vec considered her. The overseer, Drow Moon, hovered at the edge of the display with his throat still bruised dark, wanting to agree with whichever of them was going to win. The conditions you describe, Vec said, amount to a Terran contractor keeping an unsecured classot predator as a pet in a food supply hold that connects to every larder line on a 9,000-soul station. You call that a containment opportunity. I call it a breach that hasn't finished happening yet. Do you know what a classot does, Inspector, when the low arousal state you're so fond of ends? Because it always ends. You've read the file. You wrote part of it. 206. And every one of those 206 was somebody who thought they had a moment more than they had. The contractor. The contractor is a factor I am going to remove, Vec said, not a factor I am going to build a policy around. Inspector, I respect the registry, truly. You catalog the dark so the rest of us can sleep. But cataloging is not the same as commanding, and this is now an enforcement matter, and enforcement's read is simple. There is a loose classot on my station and a civilian standing next to it, and my duty is to that station's 9,000, not to your discipline's data, and not to one contractor's poor judgment. I am going to give the retrieval protocol one attempt, because the regs require it. When it fails, and we both know it will fail, I am going to give the other order. And the contractor is going to be somewhere else when I do, because I am not in the business of adding a 207th name to your file over a girl who fed a monster because she was lonely. Sethit stood in the hard, white daylight of the operations ring, with Coriol turning below, and understood that she had lost the argument she'd come up to make, and that Vec was not a villain, which was the worst part, because a villain you could beat with the truth, and Vec had the truth on his side of the ledger too. He was a competent being doing a defensible thing. That was how the worst things nearly always got done. So she stopped making that argument and started making a different one. One attempt at retrieval, she said, by the protocol. By the protocol. Then I invoke observer's right, registry statute. On any live handling of a registry specimen, a first-rank inspector may be present in the operational space and may halt for cause once for no longer than a specimen's single respiratory cycle. She let that sit. You know the statute. It's older than enforcement. I will be in that hold when your team goes in. And if I call the halt, you give me the length of one breath before you proceed. Vec's ranks of eyes went still, reading her for the trick, and finding, because there wasn't one, not really, only a girl's request for 60 seconds folded into 400 years of statute. Nothing he could refuse without looking like a being who feared a single breath. Granted, the marshal said, one breath, Inspector, and then this ends the way it was always going to end. He turned back to his display, to his red room and his blue exits. Assemble the team. We move at the next light cycle, and somebody get the Terran off my deck. The next light cycle, Sethit thought, climbing back toward the spine, toward 22 decks of descent and a human who had asked her for exactly one thing. A single respiratory cycle of a classaught runs about 9 seconds. She was going to have to make 9 seconds do the work of 60. She had a knight, a statute, a survivor, and a cat. She had built cases out of less. She had never built one that mattered more. They came for Rue 3 hours after the inspector left, and they came the way people always came when they thought a thing would be easy. Too many of them, too loud, with their minds already made up. Rue heard the deck door cycle and looked up from the number 7 pen, and counted 4 handlers filing in, Keld, big, station security build, with catch poles and a stun lattice, and the particular swagger of beings who had been told to remove one small unarmed Terran, and had decided it was beneath them to be careful about it. Behind them, in the doorway, hanging back, was the overseer himself, Drow Moon, throat dark, and Rue understood that he had come down in person because he wanted to be the one who told the marshal it was handled. Tavar, Moon said, collect your animal, the small one, and come with these handlers. You're being reassigned pending review. Don't make it difficult. Rue set down her rake. The beast, at the far end of the hold in its bar of afternoon light, had lifted its head. She saw the handlers see it. She saw the swagger come off them like heat off a cooling plate. 400 years of the file lived in their spines even if they'd never read a page of it, because you did not work Concord security without knowing what a registry ought was, and none of them had understood, until they were actually in the room with it, unnetted, ungated, 40 body lengths away and looking at them. What that abstraction meant in a room with a floor and a door and their own soft throats. It won't do anything, Rue said, unless you make it think it needs to. So here's how this goes. You lower the catch poles because a raised pole reads as a threat display to a big animal, and I would genuinely rather you didn't. And then you go back and tell the overseer that the girl said no. The girl, Moon said from the doorway, but his voice had gone up half a register, does not get to say no. The girl, Rue said, is the only person on this station that animal will let stand next to it, and you are about to find out what it does when 4 strangers with poles try to drag her out of its sight. I don't know exactly what it'll do. That's the honest answer, overseer. I know it likes me, and I know it's calm, and I know it hasn't hurt anybody in 6 days, and I know that if you scare it in an enclosed space with the one heartbeat it trusts being hauled backward through a door, I do not have a good prediction for you. She let that sit. So, lower the poles. Go tell the marshal I wouldn't come. Let him decide if it's worth what it'll cost to make me. Chester chose that moment to jump down off the workbench. He did it lazily, a fat orange thump onto the deck plates, and he sat, and he looked at the four handlers with the flat golden contempt that Rue had watched empty rooms of much larger animals. And then he walked not toward them, not away, just across on some errand of his own, tail up, unbothered, directly through the middle of the standoff, and sat down again in the exact center of the floor between the handlers and the beast, and began with enormous deliberation to wash his face. And the beast lay back down. It was the cat that did it. Rue watched the handlers watch it happen, and she knew they didn't understand what they'd seen, only that they'd felt it. The deadliest animal in the galaxy had read the room, and the thing it had read the room off of was a 12-year-old tomcat deciding a situation was boring. If the small one wasn't worried, the big one wasn't worried. The cat was the barometer, and the beast had learned to read him the same way Rue did. That, said the nearest handler very quietly to no one, is the specimen, and it just took its cue from a house animal. Yeah, Rue said, he does that. Now please lower the poles. They lowered the poles. Moon stood in the doorway a moment longer, throat working, doing the arithmetic of a being who had come to look decisive, and was going to have to go back upstairs and report that a contract laborer and a cat had turned his security detail around without a hand being raised. And then he turned and left, and the handlers filed out after him, and the deck door cycled shut, and Rue let out a breath she hadn't told herself she was holding. Okay, she said to the empty hold, to the feed animals, to the cat, to the enormous black shape breathing in the light. Okay, that bought us till morning. Let's not waste it. Ossic came down alone at the deep of the station's night, when the corridor lights had dimmed to their rest cycle amber, and Deck 22 was as quiet as it ever got. Rue had half expected him. He'd stood in the doorway that afternoon with the particular hunger of a person who has spent 9 years being a page, and has just met someone who read the sentence he was written in, and people like that came back. She let him in, and he stood a while at the safe end of the hold, watching the beast, and the beast lifted its head and turned it toward him and held it there. And Rue watched the handler and the animal that had killed his team consider each other across 40 body lengths of straw and amber light, and she did not interrupt it, because some conversations don't have words and you shouldn't step on them. It knows me, Ossic said finally. His voice was strange. After 9 years, it knows my scent. He stopped. It's not going to do anything, is it? No, Rue said. It remembers you, but not like a grudge. It doesn't have grudges. She searched. It's got a list of things it didn't finish, and you're on it, and I think a part of it is glad the page is still there. That's as close to happy as that animal's got, probably, recognizing something it didn't lose. Ossic made a sound that might have been a laugh and might not. He came a few steps closer, into the hold, not the envelope, and sat down heavily on the crate, and the amber light caught the soft seams of his carapace, and Rue thought again that he'd stopped somewhere and never started again, and that maybe tonight was the first night in 9 years he'd let himself sit in a room with the thing that stopped him. They're coming at the light cycle, he said. You know that. Vex got a hard team assembling on the Aught tier right now, cutting frames, suppression foam, a full retrieval loadout, and they're bringing Talon. Who's Talon? Ossic's mandibles clicked. The station's own animal. The apex handling beast. Enforcement keeps one on every major way station. A cracked, bred and trained to dominate hostile fauna. It's how they move dangerous things when the tech isn't enough. You put the cracked in the room and most animals, even big ones, even smart ones, fold, because the cracked is the biggest predator they've ever met, and it's radiating I am in charge here on every channel an animal can read. It's the last card before the kill order. Vex going to send Talon in to make your beast submit, and when it doesn't work he's going to say the animal is uncontrollable and give the order, and he'll be right on paper, because nothing has ever made a classot submit and a cracked won't either. But he has to try it. The regs say try the animal before you kill the animal. Rue was quiet. She looked at the beast. She looked at the cat, asleep now in the crook of the beast's foreleg, a small orange curl against the black. So they're going to bring their scariest animal down here, she said slowly, to frighten my animal into behaving, in front of the one person and the one cat that it trusts, in an enclosed space. Yes. Osik, Rue said. Have you ever watched two apex predators meet? Once on Ves. It's the worst thing I've ever seen. I've watched it a lot, Rue said. Not on death worlds, in shelters, in quarantine holds like this one. You get two big animals in a space and everybody who's never worked animals thinks there's going to be a fight, and there almost never is because a fight is expensive and apex predators are, above everything else, economical. What actually happens is they read each other. In about a second and a half. Faster than you can see. And one of them decides it's the smaller animal, and it makes itself small, and that's that. No blood, just arithmetic. She turned to look at him. The people bringing Talon down here think they know how that arithmetic comes out, because on this station, Talon's always been the biggest number in the room. They've never put Talon in a room with the actual biggest number in the catalogued galaxy. They think they're bringing a threat. They're bringing an asterisk comparison. And I don't think they've thought about what happens to a room's whole idea of who's in charge when their scariest animal takes one read of my sad, tired beast and lies down. Osik stared at her. You think Talon will submit? I think Talon's a smart animal that stayed alive by being right about who to be scared of, Rue said. And I think the second they open that door, Talon is going to make the exact same read that your four handlers' spines made this afternoon, and the exact same read your whole retrieval team made on Ves before the netting, and it's going to do the economical thing. And the whole plan Vex built, the plan where his animal cows my animal and proves it's containable or killable, is going to fall apart in a second and a half in front of him, before a single frame gets deployed. She stood and picked up the brush, and looked at the great sleeping shape. The trouble is what Vec does asterisk after, because a marshal who's just watched his best card fold isn't going to feel humbled, Osik. He's going to feel embarrassed. And embarrassed men with kill orders are the most dangerous animals in any room, so the read isn't going to save us. The read just changes what kind of danger we're in. She looked at him. I need you to do something for me, before the light cycle. Name it. The observers write the inspector invoked. 1 breath. 9 seconds. Rue's flat calm voice did not change, but something under it went very still and very certain, the way Chester went still and certain before he was right about a room. 9 seconds isn't enough. It was never enough. The inspector knows it, I know it, and I've been thinking all night about how you make 9 seconds into the 60, a man needs to actually see something. She crouched by the beast and laid her hand on the great armored jaw, and the beast breathed, slow, into her palm. And I figured it out. But it only works if the beast does exactly what I've spent 6 nights teaching it, at exactly the right second, in front of a man who's decided it's a monster. And it only works if you're standing where I need you, doing the one thing I can't do myself because I'll be busy. She looked up at him. You survived that animal by standing still and paying attention. I need you to do it one more time. Can you? Osik looked at the beast, at the cat, at the girl with her hand on 400 years of death, asking him calmly to help her keep it alive. Tell me where to stand, he said. Sethit did not sleep either. She spent the station's night in the Operations Rings Records Annex, alone, reading not the file on Registry Aught which she knew by heart, but the annex on the human, the one she had skipped, the one the personnel entry had told her to see and she had not. She saw it now. TOVAR Rue. Companion animal cleared under small fauna allowance. Species, Felis catus terran domestic. Individual name, Chester. Age, 12 solar standard. Note appended by intake xenobiologist on cataloging. Contractor's companion animal assessed for hold compatibility. Finding, recommend caution. The Terran domestic felid presents as sedentary and low threat, but is a specialized ambush predator retaining full apex hunting instinct in a domesticated frame, a lineage of solitary killers that Terran civilization did not tame so much as agree to house. On its homeworld, the felid occupies an apex micropredator niche and has driven measurable extinctions. Its calm is not docility. It is the confidence of an animal with no natural check on its behavior. Terran owners describe this as attitude. It is more properly understood as the settled arrogance of a small creature that has never, across the whole of its evolutionary history, had cause to be afraid. Recommend. The felid is cleared for the hold. Recommend further that the conquered note for its own records that the Terran subclade keeps as a beloved household companion, feeds twice daily, permits to sleep on the bed, a creature that is, in every way that matters to instinct, a perfect apex predator that simply happens to be small. The Terrans do not appear to find this remarkable. This intake officer finds it deeply so. Sethit read it twice. Then she sat for a long while in the records annex with the great banded planet turning in the window and the noon light climbing the arc of the reach, and she thought about a beast that had spent 400 years being the thing that everything feared, walking 22 decks through a station to lie down in a strip of sun beside the one creature in the galaxy that had looked at it and felt, on the deepest and oldest channel an animal has, nothing to be afraid of. Not courage, not compassion, not a plan. Just the settled arrogance of a small apex who had decided the big one was furniture, and, in deciding it, had given the big one the one thing 400 years of wardens never could. Permission to stop. Sethit Vane closed the annex. She had, she realized, been thinking about the confrontation to come as a problem of statute and seconds. It was not. It was a problem of getting one embarrassed marshal to make the same read a 12-year-old cat had made without effort on his first night in the hold. It was a problem of teaching an institution to see an animal instead of a category. She had 9 seconds to do it in. She began, in the quiet, to plan how to spend them. The retrieval team came down at first light cycle in a hard column, 12 of them, and Rue watched them file into her hold the way she'd watched a lot of things file into her hold that were about to have a worse day than they'd planned. They came in full frames, enforcement hardshell, the bronze-plated Threll and a mix of others, moving in the tight overlapping cover that meant they'd trained for this together and never once trained for what it actually was. They carried the loadout Ossic had named. The cutting frames folded on their backs, the suppression foam projectors, the long articulated capture arms that could reach into a space no living being wanted to reach into. They spread along the safe wall in a practiced arc, and the barrels and lenses of a dozen devices came up and pointed at the far end of the hold, where the beast lay in the first thin bar of morning light with the cat asleep against its jaw. Marshal Vec came in behind them. He did not wear a frame. That was a statement, and Rue understood it. A marshal in a frame admits the animal might reach him. A marshal in his bare bronze plate tells the room the animal will not get the chance. He walked to the center of the safe wall and surveyed the hold, his 2 ranks of eyes moving over the feed pens, the shutters, the workbench, the girl, the cat, the beast, cataloging it all as terrain. Inspector Sethit Vane came in last and took up a position Rue noted carefully, not with the team, not with Vec, but off to the side, near the freight seam at the deep end of the hold, closer to the beast than to the door. Observer's position. She had a data slate in one foreleg and nothing else. She caught Rue's eye once across the room and did not nod and did not signal, and that was itself a kind of signal. I'm here, I'm ready, we do it the way we said. Contractor, Vec said, step to the wall, now, this is your last instruction and there will not be a second one. Marshal, Rue said, without moving from where she stood mid-hold between the team and the beast, exactly where she'd told Ossic she'd be. Before you do this, I want to say one thing for the record so it's logged and so you heard it. That animal is calm. It's been calm for 6 days. Everything you're about to do is going to make it less calm, and there is no version of the next 10 minutes that is safer than the version where you all just leave. You've got a registry inspector who will tell you the same thing. You've got my word, for whatever a contractor's word is worth. I'm not asking you to trust the beast. I'm asking you to trust the 6 days it's already given you of not hurting anyone. That's a longer record of good behavior than most of the people in this room could show for their last 6 days. Please just leave it be. Noted, Vex said, in the voice of a being noting nothing. Medical, sedation protocol. Least force first. The regs require an attempt at chemical suppression before we escalate. Load the frames and put it down soft. Rue almost laughed and caught it, because laughing at a marshal with a kill order in his pocket was the kind of thing that got people hurt, and because the thing she wanted to laugh at was not funny, only stupid in the particular institutional way that stupid things become when enough serious people salute them on the way past. You're going to dart it, she said. We're going to sedate it, per protocol. With what dose? With the dose the file specifies for a class ought. The file's dose is for a healthy, arousal state ought you're trying to knock down in a fight, Rue said. You want to give a resting, 400-year-old understimulated animal a combat dose of a compound its physiology has never once metabolized in a calm state, in an enclosed room, 22 decks from the nearest medbay, on the theory that the number in the file is a real number and not a guess somebody made once and nobody ever got to check, because everything that dose was ever used on was already trying to kill them. She shook her head. You don't have a dose for this animal, Marshal. Nobody does. The dose in the file is the dose for the monster in the file, and I keep telling you, the monster in the file is a shadow. You put a combat suppressant into a calm animal at a combat dose, and one of two things happens. Either it does nothing, because the animal's whole metabolism is running slow and it processes the compound like water, and now you've stung it for no reason and taught it that the room can hurt it. Or it does too much, because a slow metabolism holds a drug differently than a raging one, and you stop a heart that's beating 12 times a minute, and you've killed the specimen you came to retrieve, in front of a registry inspector doing the least force option. Those are your outcomes. Pick one. Vex ranks of eyes fixed on her. You're a xenostock laborer. I'm the person who's dosed more sick large animals than your entire medical team put together, because dosing sick large animals is what a xenostock laborer does when the cull stock comes in half dead, and somebody has to decide whether to treat it or end it. I've stopped hearts I meant to save, Marshal. Everybody who's ever pushed a syringe into something big has. That's how you learn the file numbers are lies. You learn it the hard way, over an animal that trusted you, and you don't forget it. She looked at the medical handler already raising the dart frame, a lean, nervous Keld who would not meet her eyes. You, whatever you're rated at, you've never dosed a resting aught because there's never been one to dose, so you're about to guess. And your guess is the file number, and the file number is going to be wrong because it was always going to be wrong and it's just a question of which way. She turned back to Vec. So, least force, go ahead. But it's in the record now that the inspector's expert on scene told you the dose was a guess, and you did it anyway, and whichever way it goes wrong, that's yours. There was a silence. The medical handler looked at Vec. Vec looked at the beast, the sleeping black shape, the slow-lifting armored back, 12 breaths a minute in the morning light, and Rue watched the marshal do, for the first time, a piece of the arithmetic she'd been trying to hand him since he walked in. The arithmetic where the least force option had a real chance of killing the very thing that made him a hero for retrieving it alive, on the word of a laborer he did not want to believe and could not quite dismiss. Hold the sedation, Vec said. The medical handler lowered the frame with an eagerness that told Rue exactly how much the handler had wanted to be told too. Not because you're right, Vec said to Rue. Because if you're right, I've killed the specimen, and if you're wrong, I've lost nothing by finding another way. That's not deference, that's arithmetic. I don't care what you call it, Rue said. You held. That's the part that matters. That's the only part that ever matters that somebody held. She glanced at the beast. Now do it again with the next thing and the next all the way down, and maybe we all walk out of here. The next thing, Vex said, is not a thing you'll ask me to hold on. He turned to the deck door. Handlers, bring up Talon. The deck door cycled, and the station's apex warbeast came into the hold. Rue had built a picture of Talon from Ossic's description, and the picture was accurate, and the picture was, like every picture of a living animal, too small. The crack came through the door on 4 heavy limbs, low and wide, a slate-gray mountain of scarred muscle and interlocking bone plate, jaws that hinged in 2 directions. A crest of quills laid flat along its spine that Rue knew from 100 smaller animals meant it was already reading the room and had not yet decided what to feel. 2 handlers flanked it on control lines they clearly trusted about as far as they could throw the animal, which was not far. It was, unmistakably, the biggest and most dangerous thing on Coryall Reach. It had been, anyway, until 6 nights ago. Talon came 3 steps into the hold and stopped. Rue watched it happen the way she'd told Ossic it would happen, faster than the eye could properly track. A whole conversation in a second and a half, conducted on channels no one in a frame could read. The crack's crest half-raised, coming up to challenge, and then, as the great slate head swung toward the far end of the hold and took its first full read of the black shape lying in the light, the crest stopping, flattening, all the way flat. The 2-way jaws parted for a threat display, closing. The heavy body, wide and forward and dominant, lowering, not crouching to spring. Rue saw the handlers misread it for half a heartbeat and start to shout, but she knew the shape of it, and it was the other thing. The older thing lowering, and the great scarred head sinking, and the whole apex mass of the station's proudest weapon settling down onto the deck plates of a food larder with its chin between its forelimbs and its eyes fixed on the black shape at the far wall, and going, entirely still. Submission. Total, instant, economical submission. The biggest number in the room had met a bigger number and done the arithmetic in a second and a half and made itself small. The beast at the far wall lifted its head a fraction, regarded the cracked with the blind attention of its whole face. And then, having read the surrender for exactly what it was, and finding it required nothing further, laid its head back down in the sun. The cat did not wake up. For a moment the only sound in the hold was 12 enforcement troopers not breathing. "Get it up," Vex said. His voice had changed, just slightly, just enough. "Handlers, get the animal up, advance it." "Marshal," one of Talon's handlers said, hauling on a control line that had gone slack because the animal on the end of it had decided the line no longer applied to anything real. "Marshal, it won't. It's not responding to the goad, it's afraid," said the other handler, in the flat, wondering voice of someone watching the impossible. Talon's asterisk afraid. "I've never, Marshal, in 6 years I've never seen it." "It is a trained animal and it will respond to the goad," Vex said, and Rue heard the thing she'd predicted come into his voice, the thing under the command, the embarrassment starting its slow burn, or it will be replaced. Escalate the stimulus. "Marshal, if we escalate the goad on a submitting cracked in an enclosed space, it may redirect. It may." "Escalate the stimulus." They escalated the stimulus. Rue saw the handler's thumb move on the goad control and saw Talon flinch, a full-body cringe, the pain arriving on top of the fear, and she understood with a cold clarity that they were about to make the single most dangerous mistake available to them. They were about to hurt a frightened apex predator in a closed room, which was the one thing, the exact one thing, that turned a second and a half of peaceful arithmetic into blood. "Stop," Rue said, not loud, but she put into the one word everything 11 years of reading rooms had taught her, and it cut across the hold. "Stop hurting it. Marshal, call your handler off right now, or that animal is going to redirect the pain onto the nearest moving thing, and the nearest moving thing is your own troopers." You are about to get people killed, and it won't even be my beast that does it. It'll be yours." Vex's ranks of eyes snapped to her, and in the half-second of his hesitation, the beast moved. Not toward the team, not toward Talon. Rue's whole body went to ice, and then, reading it, unclenched, because the beast was doing the thing she'd spent 6 nights not teaching it, the thing that couldn't be taught, only allowed. It had risen, silent, enormous, blotting the morning light, and every device in the hold tracked it, and every trooper's frame whined with target locks, and Seth Vane's voice cut across all of it. Asterisk observers halt, the inspector called, sharp and formal and absolute, statute 400 years old landing in the room like a dropped weight. First-rank inspector, warden registry, I invoke the halt for cause for 1 respiratory cycle. Hold, everyone hold. And Marshal Koru Vek, who despised the interruption with every plate of his body, who wanted nothing in the galaxy more than to give the order and be done, held. Because the statute was older than his office, and there were 12 troopers and a registry inspector, and a station full of records watching whether enforcement honored its own law, and a marshal who broke the oldest observer right in the Concord over a single breath, was a marshal who would spend the rest of his career explaining it. He held 9 seconds, and the beast in the held silence did not advance on the team, and did not fall on the flinching cracked, and did not do any of the 206 things the file said it would do. It crossed the hold slow, unhurried, the way it did everything, and it stopped in the center of the floor between the team and the girl, in the exact spot where the cat had sat down the day before to end a different standoff. And it lowered itself, huge and black and blind, onto the deck plates. And it laid its head down, facing the team, facing the barrels and the frames and the marshal. And it let out the long, slow, 400-year breath, the one that stirred the straw dust up into the morning light, the one Rue had learned meant, I have decided there is nothing here I need to fight. It put itself between them and Rue. And then, having put itself there, it went to sleep. 6 seconds, Seth had said quietly into the room, watching the count. She had not lowered her slate. 5. Marshal, look at it, not at the file, at the animal. It had every one of you in reach, and it lay down. 4. It walked 22 decks through your station and hurt no one. 3. Your own war beast read it and chose peace, and you had to asterisk hurt your animal to override the peace it chose. 2. That is not an uncontrollable animal, Marshal. That is the most controlled animal any of us has ever seen, and the thing controlling it is not us and not fear and not a cage. 1. She lowered the slate. The breath is over. The halt is spent. It's your order now. But you looked. I made you look. Whatever you decide, you decided it having actually seen the thing in front of you and not the thing in the file. That's all the registry ever asks, that we look before we write the last page. The 9 seconds were gone. The hold was silent except for the vast slow breathing of the sleeping beast, and very faint, the sound of a 12-year-old cat beginning, against all sense, to purr. Marshal Vex stood in the hard morning light with the kill order in his mouth, and the whole room waiting to hear which way 400 years would fall. Marshal Vex did not give the kill order. Rue watched him not give it, and watched what it cost him, and understood that she was watching a proud being do the second hardest thing his kind ever did, which was change his mind in front of subordinates. He did not soften. His plates did not unclench. But the 2 ranks of eyes moved once more, over the sleeping beast and the purring cat and the flinching war beast still pressed flat to the deck, and something behind them recalculated, and when he spoke his voice had gone from verdict to procedure. Stand down the frames, Vex said. Withdraw Talon handlers carefully. Nobody escalates anything. A pause hard. The retrieval is suspended, not concluded, suspended. The team stood down. It took a while, because troopers in full frame do not relax quickly, and the thing in the middle of the floor was still the thing in the middle of the floor. Talon's handlers coaxed the cracked backward toward the door, and the great slate animal went gratefully, keeping its lowered head aimed at the beast the whole way, and only when the deck door had cycled shut behind it did the crest come up off its spine, out in the corridor, where it was allowed to be an apex again. When the hold had emptied to just Vec, Sethet, Ossic, Rue, and the sleeping beast, the marshal turned to the inspector, and Rue saw that the embarrassment had not gone anywhere. It had only changed shape. "You made me look," Vec said. "Fine, I looked. And I'll tell you what I saw, Inspector, since you're so fond of the truth. I saw an animal that could kill everyone in this room decide not to. Once, this morning, on a full stomach in the sun with its—" He searched for a word and landed on one that clearly galled him, with its companions nearby and nothing to provoke it. "That is not safety. That is a good mood. And I am not permitted to base the security of 9,000 souls on a classot's good mood. You know that. You've written the reports on what happens when the mood ends." "I have," Sethet said. "And I'd have said exactly what you just said 4 days ago. I want you to understand that. I'm not naive about the animal. I've stood over more of its work than you have. But I've spent 3 days down here now, Marshal, and I've watched the thing every report I ever wrote said was impossible, and I've had to accept that the reports were describing an animal that had never once been given a reason to be anything but what we made it. We caged it for 400 years and then wrote a file about how dangerous a caged, frightened, hunted thing is. We never asked what it might be if it weren't caged and frightened and hunted. And now we know. It's asterisk this." She gestured slow at the sleeping shape. "It's tired and it's careful, and it would rather sleep in the sun. That's the actual animal, Marshal. The monster in the file is the shadow we cast on it." "Poetry," said Vec, but without much force. "Data," said Sethet. "I have 3 days of it, and it all points one direction, and you can read every hour of it before you decide anything. But you're right about one thing, and I won't pretend otherwise. I can't guarantee the mood. Nobody can guarantee a living thing. So here's what I'm actually asking you for, and it isn't let it go. It's don't kill it, and don't break the thing that's keeping it calm, while the registry studies why it's calm. That's a smaller ask than you think and a bigger one than you'll like." Vec was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the thing Rue had been dreading since the beginning. The thing she'd known was coming because it was the reasonable-sounding thing, and the reasonable-sounding thing was always the trap. "There's a registry deep research station at HFY Deep," the marshal said. "Hardened, isolated, built for exactly this long-term study of high-classification fauna under controlled conditions. I can authorize a transfer. The animal goes there in a proper containment frame, and your discipline studies its calm for as long as it takes safely away from a crude waste station and a food supply line and a civilian contractor. That's my compromise, Inspector. That's the version where nobody dies and the conquered still does its job. The animal lives. It just lives somewhere it can't kill 9,000 people if the mood turns." He looked at Rue for the first time in the conversation. "The contractor is reassigned and compensated. The companion animal goes with her. Everybody walks away. It's more than fair." And it was. That was the horror of it. It was the fair, sane, defensible answer, and Rue watched the inspector's careful face and saw that even Sethet could not immediately find the hole in it. Because on paper there was no hole in it. The beast lived, Rue lived, the cat lived. The station was safe. The discipline advanced. "On paper." "No," Rue said. Vec's ranks of eyes came back to her. "No" is not a word a contractor gets to say to a marshal about the disposition of conquered property. It's the only word I've got, and I'm going to keep saying it, so let me at least tell you why, and then you can do whatever you're going to do." Rue crouched down beside the beast's great blind head and laid her hand on the plated jaw, and the beast breathed slow into her palm, asleep, trusting. 400 years finally set down. "You want to take it to a hardened, isolated research station and study why it's calm." "Marshal, I already know why it's calm, and you're about to destroy the answer to study the question. It's calm because it's not alone, because it's not afraid, because it's got sun and a routine and 2 heartbeats near it that don't run. That's the whole finding. There's nothing to study at HFY Deep. There's just a hardened, isolated cell, a nicer cell than the one it walked out of, but a cell, and isolated. And the second you put that animal back in isolation, you take away the only thing that changed it. And in a year, your researchers write a report that says the calm was a fluke and the animal reverted. And it's true, and it's your fault. And you never once understood that you caused the thing you claimed to be measuring. She looked up at him. You can't study why a lonely thing stopped being lonely by making it lonely again in a cleaner room. And you can't take the cat and the girl along like luggage and think that solves it, because it's not the cat and the girl as objects it needs. It's the asterisk life, the mornings. The shutters open at the same time, the brush at the same hour, the boredom, the nothing happening. That's what fixed it, that for 6 days nothing happened asterisk to asterisk it and a few small things happened with asterisk it. You can't crate that up and ship it to HFY. The instant you make it a study, it stops being a life, and the life was the whole medicine. The hold was very quiet. I have kept a lot of animals alive, Marshall, Rue said, standing. It's the only thing I've ever been good at. And the number one way people who mean well kill an animal that's finally doing better is they can't leave the doing better alone. They have to move it somewhere safer, study it, optimize it, control it, and they love it to death in a hardened facility because they cannot stand the fact that the thing that healed it was so simple and so unglamorous and so completely outside their control. The medicine was that nobody was in charge of it. And enforcement cannot abide a medicine that nobody's in charge of. So you're going to reach for the crate because the crate is the thing you know how to do, and you're going to undo 6 days of the only real thing that's ever happened to this animal, and you're going to write it up as mercy. She held his gaze. I'm asking you not to. I'm asking you to be brave enough to leave a good thing alone. I know that's the hardest order there is. I've watched a lot of people fail it. Vec looked at her for a long time. You speak, he said slowly, like someone who was moved somewhere safer once. Rue did not answer that. She looked at the beast. Disposition is above me now anyway, Vec said finally, and there was something almost like relief in it, the relief of a being handing a weight to a higher shelf. A class-ought off tier for 6 days on a conquered way station is not a station matter, and it's not a marshal's matter. The assembly has been notified. There's a reclamation board convening on the wide channel within the hour to rule on the disposition, and they will not be moved by a contractor's speech about mornings. Inspector, I promise you that. They'll ask 2 questions. Is it contained? Is it a risk? And the honest answers are no and yes, and the board rules on the honest answers, and the honest answers get that animal transferred or destroyed inside a day. He turned for the door. You've got until the board convenes to find a third honest answer. I don't think there is one, but you found 9 seconds I didn't think existed, so. He paused at the door. I'll log the retrieval as suspended for cause, and I'll enter your 3 days of data into the board record. That's the most I can do, and it's more than I should. Use the hour. The deck door cycled shut behind him. Rue looked at Sethit. A reclamation board. 9 members, Sethit said grimly. On the wide channel, every major clade with a seat. They rule on the disposition of anything the conquered classifies as too dangerous to keep and too valuable to lose. They have never once in my career ruled to leave a class-ought uncontained. They will ask the 2 questions Vec said, and they will get the 2 answers he said, and they will vote to transfer it to HFY, which is the merciful ruling, and it will kill the thing that healed it exactly the way you described. She set her slate down on the workbench. Vec's right that a speech about mornings won't move them. The board doesn't have a box for mornings. It has a box for asterisk contained and a box for asterisk risk, and we have to put something in one of those boxes that we can defend, or the merciful ruling wins. Then we give them a different box, Rue said. We don't have. Inspector. Rue crossed to the workbench, to the slate Sethit had set down, the one she'd been reading in the records annex all night. You skipped the annex on my file the first day. You told me so. And then last night you went and read it because I watched you come down this morning looking like a person who'd read something. What was in it? Sethit Vane looked at the human. Then at the cat. awake now, sitting on the crate in the morning light, watching the two of them with the flat, golden patience of a creature who had all the time in the galaxy, because nothing had ever given it a reason to hurry. "The board wants a box it can defend," Seth said slowly, and Rue watched the idea arrive behind the old inspector's careful eyes, watched it land, watched her reach the thing the intake xenobiologist had reached 8 months ago and written down, and no one had ever read. "You're right. We're not going to argue them out of the beast being dangerous. We're going to give them a second dangerous animal they've had cleared and catalogued and sitting on this station the whole time, and let them explain the difference." She picked up the slate. "Tavar, how much do you actually know about your cat?" The reclamation board convened on the wide channel at midday station time, and Seth Vane made them hold it in the hold. That was her first move, and it cost her most of the goodwill she had left. The board wanted the parties brought to the operations ring, a proper chamber, a rendered table, 9 clade seats in ordered array, the disposition of a classought conducted with the gravity a classought deserved. Seth refused. She invoked the observer's right again, and the specimen welfare clause, and a third statute so old that 2 of the board's own legal aides had to look it up. And she argued, flatly and immovably, that a ruling on an animal's disposition could not be honestly made by beings who had never once looked at the animal, and that if the board wished to rule on registry ought, they could do it looking at registry ought, through the hold's own optics, in the light. Or they could rule without the registry's cooperation, and explain that choice in the record. They convened in the hold. Not in person. No clade seat was going to put its body 22 decks down a hair's breadth from an uncaged classought, and Seth hadn't asked them to. They convened as a ring of rendered presences, 9 translucent figures standing in a loose arc across the straw-strewn floor of the larder, projected from 9 different worlds and ships and chambers across conquered space, and the effect, in the flood of noon light off Coriol, was of a council of ghosts assembled around a sleeping animal and a girl with a brush. The beast lay in its bar of sun. The cat sat on the workbench, washing. Rue stood by the beast's head where she always stood, in her stained coverall, small and plain and calm, and Seth stood beside her, and Ossic stood at the freight seam where he'd been told to stand, and Marshal Vex stood with the board as its enforcement advisor, bronze and unreadable. The board's chair was a Cedrine elder named Vorthessel, Seth's own clade, which was either fortune or its opposite. She couldn't yet tell, and Thessel wasted no time. "Inspector Vane, this board convenes to rule on the disposition of registry ought presently uncontained on a crude waystation. We have Marshal Vex report. We have your 3 days of observation. The questions before us are 2. Is the specimen contained? Is the specimen a risk? Answer them and we will rule." "The specimen is not contained," Seth said, "and every living thing is a risk. Those aren't the questions, Chair. They're the questions the board asks because they're the only 2 boxes the board has, and I'm going to spend my time asking you to build a 3rd box, because your 2 boxes are about to make you kill the most important scientific finding in the history of the Warden Registry, and do it in the name of caution." A stir among the 9 ghosts. Thessel's rendered face did not move. "You have the board's attention, Inspector. You will not have it long if you spend it on rhetoric." "Then here's data." Seth lifted her slate. "Registry ought has been off tier for 6 days. In that time it has moved through a station of 9,000, past a nursery, past mess lines, past sleeping crew, and has harmed no one. 0. It has been approached, brushed, and handled by a living being, the first physical contact in the 400-year record, and has responded with what any handler would call trust. This morning it was confronted by a full enforcement retrieval team and the station's apex war beast, and rather than attack, it placed itself between the team and the contractor and lay down. It defended by not fighting. That is not in the file, Chair. Nothing in the file predicts it, because the file describes an animal we have only ever met while frightening it. We have been studying our own reflection for 4 centuries. This is the first time we've seen the animal. Or, said one of the ghosts, a heavy-plated threll seat cousin Clade to Vec, the first time we've seen an animal in a good mood, as the marshal's report puts it, and mistaken a mood for a nature. Inspector, I've read your data. It is 6 days of an apex predator being comfortable. It is not 6 days of the apex predator being safe. The two are not the same, and a child knows the difference. A child does, Rue said. Every rendered head in the ark turned toward her. It was, Sethit understood, the first time most of them had registered the human as a participant rather than a piece of terrain. The contractor does not have standing before this board, Thessel said. The contractor, Rue said, is the only being in conquered space that animal will let stand next to it, and you're ruling on the animal, so I figure I've got the only standing that matters. I'm standing next to it, which is more than any of you can say. She didn't raise her voice. Sethit had come to understand that the human never raised her voice, that the flatness was not timidity but a kind of floor under her, a place she spoke from that nothing seemed able to move. You said comfortable isn't safe. You're right. I never said it was safe. I clean cages for a living, board members. I have never once in my life believed an animal was safe, because no animal is safe and neither are you, and neither am I. Safe isn't a thing that exists. What exists is managed, asterisk and asterisk unmanaged, asterisk and asterisk managed badly. For 400 years you've managed that animal badly, you've managed it with fear, and fear is the worst tool there is, because a frightened animal is the exact animal you're afraid of. And then for 6 days, by accident, it got managed a different way, and the different way worked better than 4 centuries of your way, and instead of asking why, you called it a mood and reached for the crate. She looked around the ark of ghosts. I'm not asking you to believe it's safe. I'm asking you to notice that your way killed 206 people, and my way has killed nobody, and to be honest with yourselves about which one of us is actually the reckless one here. Silence in the hold. The beast breathed, the cat washed. Bold, said Thessel, for a laborer. I'm not being bold, I'm being accurate. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. Rue crouched by the beast's head. But you're not going to rule for me on accuracy, because I'm a contractor and it's a class ought, and the safe vote is the transfer, and everyone in this board knows it. So the inspector and I aren't going to win this on the beast. We're going to win it on the cat. The threll seat made a sound that the translator rendered as a bark of contempt. The asterisk cat. Chair, Sethit said, stepping in, because this was the move and it had to be made cleanly. I request the board pull one record into this session. It's already in the Concord's own files. It's the intake assessment of the contractor's companion animal, filed 8 months ago by the station's xenobiology officer, cleared and catalogued and never once read above the rank of file clerk. Registry cross-reference. The animal's cleared as a Terran domestic felid individual designation Chester. I'd like the board to read the intake officer's appended note. Aloud. Into the record. All of it. Thessel's rendered eyes narrowed, but a board could not refuse to read its own cleared record without cause, and there was no cause, and so the chair queried the file and the note came up, and Sethit watched 9 ghosts read, in the flood of noon light, over the head of the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy, the assessment of the small orange creature washing its face on the workbench. Thessel read it aloud. The chair's flat voice did not editorialize, which made it worse. A specialized ambush predator retaining full apex hunting instinct in a domesticated frame, a lineage of solitary killers that Terran civilization did not tame so much as agree to house, occupies an apex micropredator niche and has driven measurable extinctions. Its calm is not docility. It is the confidence of an animal with no natural check on its behavior. The settled arrogance of a small creature that has never, across the whole of its evolutionary history, had cause to be afraid. Thessel stopped. Read the last line silently first, Sethit saw the chair's rendered eyes move over them once before the voice caught up. The Terran subclade keeps as a beloved household companion, feeds twice daily, permits to sleep on the bed, a creature that is, in every way that matters to instinct, a perfect apex predator that simply happens to be small. The Terrans do not appear to find this remarkable. This intake officer finds it deeply so. The hold was silent. The Threll seat spoke first, and its voice had changed. This is a domestic animal, a pet. It weighs nothing. It weighs about 4 kilos, Rue said. He's a little heavy. Vet says less fish. And you are telling this board that a 4-kilo house pet is. I'm not telling you anything. Your own officer told you 8 months ago, and you cleared it and filed it and never read it, because a box that says companion animal doesn't get read above a clerk. Rue reached over and scratched the cat under the chin, and the cat leaned into it, eyes shutting, the picture of a spoiled and sleepy old Tom. You want to understand where your deadliest beast went and why it won't leave. It went to the one creature in your whole catalog that looked at it and wasn't afraid. Not because the cat's brave. Cats aren't brave. Bravery is for animals that know they can lose. That, she nodded at Chester, is a creature that has never once in 12 years entertained the possibility that it is not the most important thing in any room it's in, and it looked at 400 years of death, and it decided the death was furniture, and it sat down and washed its foot. And your beast, which has spent its whole life being the thing that everything screams at, felt an animal near it that simply did not care that it existed, and something in it that had been braced since before any of you were born got to lie down. She looked up at the arc of ghosts. You've been asking the wrong question this whole time. You keep asking how to contain the big one. The big one contained itself the second it found something smaller than it that wasn't afraid. The question you should be asking is what kind of species keeps that. She scratched the cat, on the bed, feeds it whitefish, calls it a good boy, and doesn't find it remarkable. She stood. We didn't tame our apex predators, board members. Your own officer got it exactly right. We just agreed to house them. We've been sleeping next to perfect little killers for 10,000 years, and we love them, and we let them sleep on our chests, and it never once occurred to us to be afraid, because to us that's not a monster. That's just Chester. She picked up the brush. So here's the third box you wanted, Inspector. It's not contained, and it's not a risk. It's this. Humanity has been keeping animals your registry would classify as classought as beloved household pets since before we had cities, and we find them comforting, and one of ours just walked your worst nightmare into a nap. You can transfer the beast to HFY deep if you want. But the finding stands in your own record now, in your own officer's words, and every clade on this board just heard it. The deadliest thing you ever catalogued was undone, gently in 6 days, by an animal that a 20-year-old contract laborer feeds twice a day and lets sleep on the bed. She looked around the ghosts, plain and calm and immovable. I think hard about what it means that we didn't even bring you a soldier. We brought you the cat we happened to have, and the cat was enough. The board did not rule. Boards never ruled when you wanted them to. They recessed and conferred, and the 9 ghosts flickered into private channels and left the hold to its silence, and Rue went back to work, because there was nothing else useful to do with the waiting, and because the beast settled when she worked. She brushed it. Long even strokes, same side first, and Sethit counted them again without meaning to, and Ossic held his post at the freight seam, and the cat migrated from the workbench to the warm plates of the beast's flank and folded himself into a loaf and shut his eyes. And for a while the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy and its ambush predator overlord and a girl with a brush made, in a flood of noon light, the most peaceful room on Coriol Reach. The ghosts came back inside the hour, and Rue knew from the shape of the arc tighter, harder, that the news was not simple. The board is divided, Chair Thessel said without preamble. 4 seats fine for transfer to HFY deep. 3 fine for a provisional stay of disposition pending further study, under the contractor's continued care on this station with monitoring. 2 abstain. A pause. The abstaining seats will not move without more than they've been shown. They find the intake note compelling and the 6-day record remarkable. They also find, correctly, that everything presented is observational. The specimen's calm has been asterisk witnessed. It has not been asterisk tested. The board cannot stay the disposition of a classaught on the strength of 6 days of good behavior without a demonstration that the calm holds under stimulus, that it is a nature and not, as the marshal put it, a mood. Seth felt the whole thing tilt toward the edge she'd been trying to keep it away from. "Chair," she said carefully, "I would strongly advise against any stimulus test on an uncontained classaught in an occupied space. The entire finding is that the animal is calm when nothing is done to asterisk it. A stimulus test is, by definition, doing something to it. You would be destroying the condition you're trying to measure and risking lives to do it." "The abstaining seats are aware of the objection," Thessel said. "They are also aware that the board cannot make an unprecedented ruling on unprecedented evidence without a single controlled data point. One of them has proposed a protocol. Marshal Veck has reviewed it and finds it survivable. The board will hear the registry's objection, and then it will proceed. Because the alternative is a transfer vote that carries 4-3 with 2, and the transfer is what happens if we learn nothing more. So the test is, in fact, the animal's best chance. I would ask the registry to consider that before it objects further." Rue had stopped brushing. "What's the protocol?" she said. The Threll seat answered, and Rue understood as it spoke that this was the seat that had proposed it, and that the seat had proposed it not entirely in bad faith but not entirely in good faith either. That it wanted the beast to fail, a little, because a beast that failed was a beast the seat had been right about all along. "A controlled aggression stimulus," the Threll seat said. "Directed not at the specimen but at *U* contractor. The station has a handling drone, a maintenance unit, unarmed, expendable. On the board's signal it will enter the hold and simulate a threat display toward you. A raised implement, a fast approach. Not contact, a display. We wish to observe what the specimen does when the being it is bonded to is threatened in its presence. If it responds with lethal force, the board has confirmed the animal is exactly what the file says. A lethal actor, uncontainable, it's calm, contingent, and its danger absolute, and the transfer carries. If it responds with restraint, the seat's rendered plates shifted, then the board has its controlled data point, and the abstentions may move. It is the cleanest test available. And you, contractor, are not in real danger. The drone will not touch you. Only the specimen will believe you are threatened." Rue was quiet for a moment. "You want to make it think someone's coming to hurt me," she said, "to see if it kills the someone." "Yes. And if it does kill the drone, which is the most natural thing in the world for a bonded apex predator to do, by the way, that's not a defect, that's asterisk love, that's the exact instinct that makes your own war beast worth keeping. Then you'll have proven it's a monster and you'll transfer it. We will have proven it's a lethal actor." "Yes." "And you'll do this," Rue said, "in an enclosed hold, 22 decks down, with a nursery 6 decks up, on the theory that a 206-count apex predator will neatly restrict its response to one expendable drone and not, say, to the nearest 3 of your monitoring feeds, or the freight seam, or the wall between this hold and the next." Her flat voice did not rise, but something in it had gone very cold and very clear. "You've designed a test where the safe outcome for you is the animal doing the one thing that dooms it, and the outcome that saves it requires it to override 400 years of instinct in a situation you've engineered specifically to trigger that instinct. You've built a trap and dressed it as a data point. And the worst part is I don't even think you know you did it. I think you genuinely believe this is fair." The Threll seat's plates shifted, and Rue saw that she'd landed something, that the seat had not fully seen the shape of its own proposal until she'd said it plainly. "Nonetheless," Thessel said, and there was something almost regretful in the chair's voice, "it is the protocol on the table, and it is the animal's only path to a stay, and the board will proceed unless the registry withdraws its objection to the transfer instead. Those are the two doors, Inspector. The test or the transfer. Choose. Sethit looked at Rue. And Rue, to Sethit's astonishment, smiled, a small, dry, plain thing, the first Sethit had seen on her. "Run your test," Rue said. "But we run it my way or it proves nothing and you know it. If your drone charges me cold out of nowhere and the beast tears it apart, you'll have proven a startled animal is dangerous, which, congratulations, water is wet. That's not a nature. That's a reflex, and reflexes don't tell you anything about what an animal chooses. If you want to test what it chooses, you have to test it awake, aware, given a second to decide. So here's how we do it." She set down the brush. "I stand where I always stand. The beast stays where it is. Ossic, the handler at the seam, the one who survived it, he calls it, out loud. He gives the beast a full second of warning that something's about to move on me, so the animal is choosing and not just reacting. And then your drone does its display. And we all find out what a 400-year-old killer does when it has one full second to decide whether to kill for me or trust me." She looked around the arc of ghosts. "That's the real test. Not is it dangerous. Everything's dangerous. The test is, can it choose? And if you're not willing to run that test, if you'd rather startle it and call the reflex a nature, then you've told me you were never actually asking a question. You'd already decided the answer, and you just wanted the animal to sign it." The board conferred. It did not take long. "The chair finds the contractor's modification reasonable," Thessel said, "and revealing, the test will run as she describes. Handler Ossic will call the warning. The drone will display not contact. The board will observe." A pause. "Contractor, you understand that if the specimen kills the drone, this ends in transfer, and there is nothing further the registry or you can say." "I understand," Rue said. "And you are willing to stand in the path of your own test." "It's not my test I'm standing in the path of," Rue said. "It's yours. I already know what my animal's going to do. I've known since the first night. You're the only ones who need convincing." She crouched and put her hand one last time on the great blind jaw, and the beast breathed slow into her palm, and she said something to it too low for the translator, something that was just tone, just the sound a person makes to an animal to say nothing is wrong. Whatever happens next, nothing between us is wrong. And then she stood and stepped back to her place and folded her hands and became very still. "Ossic," she said, "when you're ready, nice and clear. Give it the second." The deck door cycled, and the maintenance drone came in. A squat four-limbed utility unit, an articulated implement raised in one manipulator, and it oriented on the small human standing calm in the noon light, and it began, on the board signal, to move toward her fast. "Guard," Ossic called, clear and steady, the old handler's word cutting across the hold a full second before the drone reached its speed, a word he'd chosen because it was a word, because it gave the animal not an alarm but an asterisk frame, a second to know what was being asked. "Guard and easy. She's all right. She's all right. Watch and easy." The beast came up out of the straw like a silence-given mass. Sethit's whole body locked. Every ghost in the ark flinched back in its distant chamber. The drone closed on Rue, implement raised, and the beast rose over the girl, enormous, black, 400 years of death unfolding in a room full of witnesses, and there was one endless fraction of a second in which the entire disposition of the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy hung on what it did next. And it stepped over Rue, not at the drone, and put its great blind head down between the girl and the charging machine, low, broad, a living wall, and it did not strike. It did not lunge. It did not open the drone like the file said it would open anything that moved on what was its. It simply stood there between the threat and the girl, filling the space, and it turned its eyeless face toward the drone and held it there motionless, and let the machine run up short against the sheer immovable fact of its body and stop, implement still raised, unharmed, uncrushed, unfinished. And then, deliberately, in front of the board, in the flood of noon light, The beast lowered itself back down over the girl's feet, so that Rue stood in the shelter of its bulk with one hand come to rest on its jaw, and it laid its head down facing the stopped drone, and it let out the long, slow 400-year breath, and it waited patient, unhurried, entirely in control of the 206 things it had chosen not to do, for the machine to understand that it had been refused. The drone's implement lowered, its threat routine, finding no target and no opening and no fear, timed out. The cat, who had not moved from the beast's flank through the entire thing, opened one eye, assessed the situation, found it beneath his concern, and went back to sleep. Nobody in the hold breathed. "The specimen," said Chair Thessel at last, into a silence that had gone somewhere none of them had a box for, was warned that its bonded human was under threat. It rose, it interposed, and it chose restraint under direct provocation with the target in reach. A long pause. Let the record show the board observed this directly. Let the record show the specimen did not kill when killing was the instinctive and available response. Let the record show it guarded. The Threll seat said nothing at all. The board ruled that afternoon, and the ruling was not what Rue had asked for, because boards never gave you what you asked for. They gave you a thing shaped like a compromise that had to be lived in before you could tell whether it was a home or a cell. The disposition of registry ought, Chair Thessel read into the record, the 9 ghosts arrayed once more across the straw in the failing gold of the late light cycle, is stayed, not resolved, stayed provisionally for 1 solar year, subject to review. The specimen will remain on Coriol Reach, in the custody of the Xenostock hold, under the continued care of the contractor Rue Tavar, whose provisional labor contract is hereby converted to a registry specialist appointment, first probationary grade, with the corresponding clearance and the corresponding responsibility. The specimen is not to be transferred, not to be recontained on the ought tier, and not to be subjected to further stimulus testing, on the finding that its stability is contingent on the very conditions that testing would destroy. The Warden Registry will maintain a resident inspector on station to observe, document, and the board notes the novelty of the phrase, to learn the husbandry. Rue stood very still. The board wishes to be clear about what it is and is not doing, Thessel went on. It is not declaring the specimen safe. It is declaring that 400 years of managing this animal through fear produced 206 deaths and no understanding, and that 6 days of managing it through routine, daylight, and the presence of an unafraid companion produced a guarding animal and a scientific finding without precedent, and that the conquered would be committing an act of institutional cowardice dressed as caution to destroy the second thing in the name of the first. The board is choosing, for 1 year, to be brave enough to leave a working thing alone. A pause, and something almost human came into the old Cedrine's rendered voice. The contractor said that was the hardest order there is. The board has found that she was correct. It took us 4 hours and a demonstration none of us will forget to give it. Let the record note that the order was given. The ghosts began, one by one, to wink out. The Threll seat was the last to go. It lingered a moment, its rendered face turned toward the beast, and Rue thought it might say something to her, an apology maybe, for the trap dressed as a test. But the Threll were not a species that apologized, and what it finally said was to the animal, not to her. 400 years, the Threll seat said quietly, to the beast that could not understand its words and understood its tone perfectly well. 400 years we studied you, and it took a girl with a brush to find out you were only ever tired. And then it, too, was gone. The hold was suddenly just a room again. Straw and feed animals and late gold light, and a girl, and 2 Cedrine and a cat, and the vast slow-breathing shape that was, as of that afternoon, no longer the deadliest catalogued animal in the galaxy under sentence of death, but a registry specimen in provisional care, which was a smaller and safer and infinitely stranger thing to be. Rue sat down in the straw rather suddenly next to the beast's head, and put her hand on its jaw, and the beast breathed into her palm, and she was quiet for a long time. Sethit, watching, understood that the human had been standing on her floor of flat calm for 3 days straight and had just, finally, in the emptied room, let herself feel how far the drop would have been. "You spoke to the board," Sethit said carefully, "the way Vec said you spoke to him, like someone who was moved somewhere safer once." Rue was quiet a while, her hand on the beast's jaw. "There was a place I grew up," she said finally. "Deathworld, one of the bad ones, the kind that conquered flags and won't settle. You learn young to be calm around big animals, or you don't learn anything else, because there's no second lesson." A pause. "When I was small, they decided it wasn't safe for me there, and they moved me somewhere better, somewhere hardened, somewhere with the shutters bolted for my own good. And it was safer, and I stopped doing well, the exact way I told Vec that beast would stop doing well, and nobody could work out why, because on paper I finally had everything I'd lacked." She looked at the sleeping shape. "I worked it out eventually. Safer isn't the same as better. Sometimes the thing that's hurting you is the thing that's meant to protect you, and everyone means so well you can't even be angry about it." She almost smiled. "So when the marshal reached for the crate and called it mercy, I knew the crate. I've been the animal in the nicer cell. That's the whole of my expertise, Inspector. I just recognized it." Sethit said nothing for a moment. There was nothing to say that the human did not already know better than she did. "A specialist appointment," she said at last, to give her something ordinary to hold. "First probationary grade. Congratulations, Specialist Tavar. You've been promoted from cleaning cages to cleaning the single most important cage in conquered space." "It doesn't have a cage," Rue said into the beast's jaw. "That's the whole point. It's got a hold with the shutters open." A pause. "Did I win?" "You won a year," Sethit said, "which in the disposition of a classot is roughly 400 years more than anyone has ever won before. And a year of the animal continuing to be exactly what it's been will make the next ruling easier, and the one after that, until the aught that guards is just a thing the registry knows about the world, the way it knows anything, by having watched it long enough to stop being surprised." She lowered herself into the straw beside the human, which was not a thing first-rank inspectors did, and did it anyway. "You won a year. Spend it teaching us the husbandry. That's the part of the ruling that matters, Tavar, more than the stay. They told the registry to learn the husbandry. Do you understand what that means, coming from a board? It means we finally admitted there's something to learn. From you. About the animal we've been the galaxy's foremost experts on for 4 centuries. 9 clade seats voted to be your students." She was quiet a moment. "I've been an inspector for 40 years. I never once wrote a report that ended with the registry admitting it should have asked the person cleaning the cage. That's the actual victory. The beast living is the mercy. The registry learning to ask, that's the thing that outlasts the beast." Marshal Vec found Sethit 3 days later, in the operations ring, and Rue was not there, and Sethit understood the visit was one Vec had needed to make without the human present, because it was about the kind of thing his kind only said when the person it was about could not hear it. "I've entered my final report," Vec said, looking out the curved glass at Coriol turning below. "The retrieval is closed. Concluded, not suspended. I've recommended against any future attempt for the duration of the stay and beyond." He was quiet a moment. "I've also entered a doctrinal note, enforcement-wide. It will be argued about for a decade, and it will change nothing quickly, but I've entered it, and it's in the record with my name on it, and that's the most a marshal can do about a thing he's decided he was wrong about." "What does it say?" "It says that enforcement standing protocol for high classification fauna, try the animal, and when the trial fails, end the animal is built on a false premise. The premise that the trial is neutral, that we are testing the animal's nature." Vec turned from the glass. "We are not. We are testing the animal's nature in the presence of us, and we are the most frightening thing most of these animals ever meet. And so we have spent the history of the discipline measuring how dangerous a terrified apex predator is when cornered by its worst fear, and calling the number we get its asterisk nature. The girl said we've been studying our own reflection. I've put that in a Concord enforcement doctrinal note, Inspector, in slightly more official language, but that's what it says. He almost smiled, which on a thrill was a thing that happened around the eyes and nowhere else. I've named the note, Doctrine Requires a Name. I called it the unafraid variable, because that turned out to be the one factor 400 years of the discipline never controlled for, and a cat controlled for it by accident on its first night in the hold. Seth looked at the marshal for a long moment. That's a generous thing to put your name to. It's an accurate thing, Vex said. The girl taught me the difference matters. She's insufferable about accuracy. I mean that as the highest thing I know how to say about anyone. He moved toward the lift. The husbandry protocols she's writing for the registry send enforcement a copy, all of them, especially the boring ones, especially the one about the shutters and the light. He paused at the door. On my world we have a saying, Inspector, very old from before we had ships. The thing you cannot cage you must learn to keep. We always thought it was a warning about the danger of things too big to hold. He looked back at her. I don't think it was a warning at all. I think it was instructions. And we've had it for 10,000 years and never once understood it until a Terran laborer read it back to us out of a larder. Keep, asterisk, Inspector, not cage, keep. And he was gone. Seth had stood a while in the operations ring with the great planet turning below, and thought about the difference between the two words, and about how much of the history of her discipline, of the whole Concord, maybe, was the story of beings who had a word for asterisk cage in every tongue, and had to be taught the word for asterisk keep asterisk by a species that kept perfect little killers on the bed and called them good. Then she went down the spine, 22 decks, to the brightest room on the station, to write down, in her careful first-rank hand, everything the girl could teach her about the husbandry of the thing they had all been so certain could only be feared. Her first entry was 3 words. She'd thought about it the whole way down and could not improve on them, and she had learned from the human not to try to improve on a thing that was already accurate. Open the shutters. The word got out, because words like that always get out, and by the 3rd month Coriol Reach had become a place beings arranged reasons to visit. They came dressed as inspections and supply audits and clade liaison courtesies, and they all, every one of them, found their way down the spine to deck 22 to stand at the safe end of the Xenostock hold, and watch the thing they had not believed until they saw it. The deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy, lying in a flood of noon light, breathing slow, with a fat orange cat asleep on its skull, and a small human in a coverall brushing its flank in long, even strokes. They came expecting a spectacle and they got a chore, and the chore was somehow more astonishing than any spectacle could have been, and they went away quiet, the way beings go away quiet from a thing that has rearranged something they were sure of. Seth had stayed. Her resident inspector posting had been meant as a formality and had become the work of her life. She kept the registry's record of the husbandry, and she kept it honestly, which meant most of the entries were about light and food and the times of things, and she had stopped being embarrassed that the most important scientific document of her career read like a farmer's ledger, because Rue had told her flatly, one afternoon, "That's what husbandry is, Inspector. It's a ledger of small kindnesses done on time. There's no other kind," and Seth had written that down too. She watched the human change, over the months, in the small ways a person changes when the world finally has a use for the one thing they were always good at. Rue did not soften exactly, the flat calm floor was still there, would always be there. Seth had suspected it had been built young and built to last. But the girl came up out of the deep decks more often, and she talked to the delegations when they came, plainly, never grandstanding, always with the animals' welfare first and the Concord's amazement a distant second. And she was, Seth had thought, the least impressed person on the entire station by what she had done. Which was exactly why she'd been able to do it. And the animals started coming. That was the part no one had predicted, and Rue had predicted immediately. Once the record showed that the Xenostock hold on Coryall Reach had done the impossible thing with a class ought, the registry began, quietly at first and then not quietly, routing its worst cases there. The uncontainable ones, the ones that had killed their keepers. The ones marked for culling because no facility could hold them and no protocol could calm them. The animals the discipline had written off as pure danger with no husbandry answer. They came to the reach, in hardened transports, and they came off the ramps snarling and terrified and lethal. And they went down 22 decks to a bright room with the shutters open and a girl who was not afraid of them and a cat who found them beneath his concern. And one by one, on the timescale of animals, which is slow, they learned that a day could have a shape they could count on, and they put it down. The first one they sent was a thing the registry called a scourhound, a pack apex from a gravity-heavy world, brought in alone and half-mad, having killed the 2 handlers who tried to gentle it with the standard protocol of gates and goads. It came off the ramp screaming, and the crews cleared the decks, and Rue had it walked down to the keep and put in the far pen with the shutters open, and did not go near it for 3 days. She just worked in its sight at the same hours, brushing the ought, filling the bowls, letting the mad thing watch a room in which nothing bad ever happened on a schedule it could learn. On the 4th day it stopped screaming. On the 9th it ate where she could see it. On the 20th it lay down in the sun near the old black beast and the fat old cat, and something in it that had been braced since a world of crushing weight got, at last, to set itself down. The registry sent a delegation to record the husbandry. The husbandry was 3 days of doing nothing on purpose where a frightened animal could watch. They filmed it. They could not believe how boring it was. That was the whole finding, and they still could not believe it, and Rue had stopped expecting them to. Not all of them. Rue was scrupulous about that in the record and out loud. Some animals were too far gone, hurt in ways that didn't come back, and those she could not save and did not pretend to, and she wept for exactly none of them where anyone could see, and Sethit suspected for all of them where no one could. But most of them, most of the galaxy's uncontainable monsters turned out to be, underneath, the same thing the ought had been, exhausted, frightened, and starving for a routine that nobody had ever thought to offer a thing they were too busy being afraid of. "They're not monsters," Rue said once, to a registry delegation that had come to see the growing menagerie and had used the word. She was filling a feed bowl at the time and did not look up from it. "There's no such thing as a monster. There's just animals that everything's been afraid of for so long they forgot they were allowed to stop. You people had a whole discipline for the being afraid part. Nobody ever built the stopping part. So I did. It's not complicated. It's shutters and a schedule and not screaming. You could all have done it any time in 400 years. You just never tried the thing that didn't involve a cage because the cage felt like doing something and the shutters felt like doing nothing, and you're a people who can't stand to feel like you're doing nothing." She set the bowl down. "Doing nothing on purpose, in a way an animal can trust, that's the whole husbandry. That's the secret you flew across 4 systems to learn. Try not to make it complicated on the way home. You'll want to. Don't you?" The delegation went home. It made it complicated. Committees were formed. Sethit read the eventual doctrine, 40 pages where Ruse had been 4, and laughed, alone in the operations ring, for the first time in longer than she could remember, and then sent Rue a copy with a note that said only they codified the shutters. Asterisk and Rue had sent back. An hour later, of course they did, and that had been the entire conversation, and it had said everything. The catalog entry was the thing Sethit did herself, because it was the registry's to do, and because she wanted her name on it. Registry ought, the first entry. The deadliest catalogued animal in the known galaxy, 400 years the top line of the file, 206 deaths, the quiet, the thing the crews whispered about. She did not delete the old entry. The registry did not falsify its record, and the 206 were real and deserved their truth kept. She appended. She wrote in her careful hand the 6 days and the guarding and the board and the year that had become, at its first review, a second year, and then an indefinite stay, and she wrote the husbandry findings in summary, and she wrote the thing the intake officer had written about the cat, promoted at last out of the clerk's box and into the record where it belonged. And then, at the bottom, where the registry noted the current classification of a specimen, she had a choice to make, and she thought about it for a long time, and in the end she wrote the accurate thing, because the human had taught her that the accurate thing was the only thing worth writing. Current classification, reclassified. The specimen designated registry ought is no longer assessed as the deadliest catalogued animal in known space. It has voluntarily submitted to the authority of a smaller apex, Terran domestic felid, individual designation Chester, which the specimen defers to in all matters of territory, precedence, and rest. Per the registry's own convention, the deadliest animal in a given space is the animal to which all other animals defer. By that convention, and pending no evidence of a check upon its behavior, the deadliest catalogued animal presently known to the conquered is a 4-kilogram Terran house cat, 12 solar years of age, currently asleep. The registry notes for its records that the Terran subclade keeps this animal as a beloved companion, feeds it twice daily, and permits it to sleep on the bed. The registry, at last, finds this remarkable. She read it back once. Then she filed it, and the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy became, officially, a house pet named Chester, and somewhere 22 decks down, in a flood of noon light, entirely unaware that it had just ascended to the top line of the most feared file in conquered space. The new apex predator of the known galaxy yawned, resettled itself on the warm black skull of the old one, and went back to sleep. Ossic came down to the hold on the anniversary, though he did not tell anyone that was what it was, and Rue did not ask, because she had learned that the survivors kept their own calendars, and the kindest thing you could do was let them. It had been 9 years and some months since Vess, since the plane under 2 suns and the net, and the 7 who did not come back, and Ossic had spent all of them being a page in a book the animal might read later. Frozen at the moment, the world had proven larger than him. He came down the spine in the deep of the station's night, the way he had that first time, and Rue let him in and went back to her work and left him to it, because the beast lifted its head when he came in and turned its blind face toward him and held it there, and that was a conversation, and you did not step on those. She watched him, in the amber rest cycle light, do the thing it had taken him a year to be ready to do. He crossed the hold not to the safe end, all the way into the envelope, into the reach of the animal that had killed his team, and he stopped a body length from the great lowered head, where Rue always stopped, and he stood there a long time. And then slowly, with the care of a being setting down a weight he had carried so long he'd forgotten it was heavy, Ossic lowered himself to the straw, and he sat, and he was quiet. "It let me go," he said, finally, not to Rue, to the beast. 9 years I've told myself it was luck, or that I was a page it forgot to finish. I built a whole life out of being the one it didn't get around to." His mandibles worked. "But that's not it, is it? You don't forget. You don't get around to things. You choose. You chose on that plane with 7 of my team already down and me in reach and nothing to stop you. You chose to stop. And I've spent 9 years being angry at you for the 7, and I never once let myself be." His voice caught, grateful, for being the one you decided to keep as a thing you didn't finish, because finishing is the only kind of keeping you had. "I've been a page. I kept telling it like it was a curse." He put out one careful foreleg, and the beast did not move, and he laid his hand on the great blind jaw the way he had watched the girl do it 100 times, and the beast breathed slow into his palm. And Ossic, the last man off Vess, the survivor, made a low broken sound and bowed his head. "Thank you," he said, to the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy, "for the one. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. I'm sorry I made your mercy into my wound. Thank you for the one." The beast breathed. The cat, on its skull, opened an eye, assessed the handler with the flat, golden patience of a creature who found even grief a little tedious, and went back to sleep. Rue kept working and did not look, and let the man have it. When Osik left an hour later, something had come unfrozen in him, not healed, she thought. You didn't heal a thing like Vess, but unstuck, started again. The calendar allowed at last to move past the day the world got large. He stopped at the deck door. I've asked for a transfer, he said. Field work. The registry's routing the uncontainable ones here now, and they need handlers who aren't afraid to bring them in, and it turns out, he almost smiled, it turns out I'm not afraid anymore. Of the worst thing there is, hard to be afraid of the animal that just let me thank it. He looked back at the hold, at the light, at the girl, at the vast sleeping shape. You gave me that. You and the, he shook his head, you and the asterisk cat. I don't know how to say what that's worth. You don't have to, Rue said. You already said the thing that mattered. You said it to the right one. She nodded at the beast. Go bring in the scared ones, Osik. Bring them here, we'll teach them the shutters. He went and he did. And over the years that followed, he brought in more of the galaxy's monsters than any handler in the history of the registry, and lost not one of them and not one of himself, because he had learned the only husbandry that ever worked on a frightened apex, which was to stop being afraid of it first, and he had been taught it by the worst of them, on an anniversary in a flood of amber light, with a cat asleep between them. The board's one-year review came and went and became a formality, and then an indefinite stay, and then simply the way things were, and by then no one on Coriol Reach called Deck 22 the Xenostock hold anymore. They called it the Keep, not the Cage, the Keep. Rue had not named it and did not love the name. She thought it was more solemn than a room full of straw and sleeping animals had any right to be. But the name had come from the crews, from the beings who had watched the impossible become ordinary right under their feet, and you did not get to choose what the people you lived among made sacred. Sethet Vane grew old on that station, in the good way, the way a being ages when the last chapter of their work is the one they'd waited their whole life to write. She kept the ledger. She trained the inspectors who came to learn the husbandry, and she sent them out across conquered space with copies of Rue's 4 boring pages and strict instructions to ignore the committee's 40, and slowly, on the timescale of institutions, which is slower even than animals, the discipline changed. Keep, not asterisk cage. The unafraid variable. Open the shutters. It never became simple. Beings who had a word for cage in every tongue did not learn the word for keep in one generation. But it became possible, and possible was more than it had ever been. And the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy lived out its long, strange life in a bright room with the shutters open, growing, if anything, calmer, until the crews who had once whispered its old crew name forgot to be afraid of it and started, the way beings do, to be quietly proud of it instead, the way you're proud of the oldest resident of a place, the one who was here before you and will be here after, the one the whole strange home is secretly built around. It outlived the cat. That was the only sorrow, and it was the ordinary kind, the kind every keeper signs up for the day they let themselves love a thing that will not last as long as they will. Chester made it to 17, which the registry's own record noted was long for a Terran domestic felid, longer than he had any right to, as if the fat old Tom had simply declined, in his settled arrogance, to be hurried out of a room he had decided was his. Rue was with him at the end, in the noon light, on the warm black skull of the animal he had ruled without effort for a third of his life, and it was quiet, and it was not a spectacle, and Sethet, who was there, and who had by then spent long enough among humans to have learned some of their small kindnesses, brought the girl tea and sat with her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that Rue did not already know better than she did. The beast knew. Of course the beast knew. It had felt the small heartbeat above its skull run slow, over the last days, the way it had once felt the heartbeats of the frightened stop, and it did the only thing a creature whose whole language is stillness can do about a grief. It went still. It lay in the noon light with the small orange weight gone light on its head, and it did not move for a long time, longer than Rue had ever seen it hold a stillness, and Seth understood that she was watching the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy mourn a house cat, and that this, too, belonged in no box the registry had ever built, and that she would write it down anyway, because the human had taught her that the accurate thing was the only thing worth keeping. They buried Chester on the alien field below the Reach, under the noon sun, because Rue would not put him in a recycler, and the station could refuse a registry specialist very little by then. And the beast was allowed down to the surface for the first time in 400 years to stand in the open under a sky, which everyone had feared and no one had needed to, because it only stood there, huge and black and blind in the borrowed daylight, over a small patch of turned ground and breathed. And then let the girl lead it home. Rue got another cat eventually. Not to replace him. She was very clear about that, plainly, the way she was clear about everything, when the delegation that had brought the kitten as a gift tried to make a ceremony of it. You don't replace an animal, she told them. You just decide to be a person who has animals again, knowing how it ends. That's all any of it ever is, deciding to do the thing again that you know will cost you. She took the kitten anyway. It was a small gray scrap of a thing, half feral, unimpressed, and it took one look at the deadliest animal in the catalogued galaxy, and it walked directly up to the great lowered head, and it sat down and it began, pointedly, to wash its foot. And the beast that had ruled and mourned and outlived one small sovereign lowered itself, by fractions, into the straw, and put its head down in the noon light, and let out the long, slow breath, and let the new one climb up onto its skull and fold into a loaf and shut its eyes, and it was, once again, and as it would be for the rest of its long life, exactly where it wanted to be. In the sun, in the keep, under the untroubled sleep of the smallest and most arrogant apex in the galaxy, guarded by something that weighed nothing and feared less. Seth Vane, old now, watching from the safe end of the room out of 40 years of habit she had never quite unlearned, made a note in the ledger. It was the last entry she wrote before she handed the record to the inspector she'd trained to take it, and she thought about it for a long time, the way she'd learned too, and in the end she wrote the accurate thing. The specimen is well asterisk, she wrote. It sleeps in the sun. There is a new cat. She looked at it and found it complete and added only because it was true and because a human had taught her once that the truest things are the small ones said plainly. We were never sent an army. We were sent the animals they happened to love and shown what it looks like to keep a thing instead of caging it. It has taken us 400 years and 206 deaths and one girl with a brush to learn the lesson, and the lesson is this. The deadliest thing in the galaxy only ever wanted what the smallest thing in the galaxy already had, a warm place, a quiet room, and someone nearby who was not afraid. We had it to give the entire time. We simply never thought to open the shutters. Open the shutters. That's the whole of it. That's all it ever was.